Hutchinson.
Here.
Member Kupchak.
Here.
Member Cologne.
Here.
And did I pronounce that right, Nick?
You got it.
Okay.
Here.
And Member Wade. Quorum is present.
Okay. We need to nominate a secretary and a chairman. Joe?
Yes, we do. As also a member, I'll nominate you, Pat, for chair. Reason being is you're a continuing alderman, and Scott will be leaving, and it provides continuity to the city.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? I'd like to make, well, why don't somebody else appoint Joe as the secretary?
I'd like to nominate Joe as secretary.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So we'll go to item 4, committee discussion of assigned task and providing Willow Road project guidance and feedback. Just to comment on that, I know we have 4 items listed there, but I mean, the main purpose of this, the reason we set the committee in the first place was that, you know, we had heard that people didn't feel there was enough public input for this project itself. Never thought it would get to a committee itself, but it eventually morphed its way there. So that's the purpose of this. It's not a matter of relitigating this whole project and saying, you know, whether it's something we should do or shouldn't do. It was to hear the concerns that people had when they originally heard Cedric from MWRD make his presentation on what the project is. So that's the main purpose. That's what we should keep in mind the whole time that we're talking here about this. So I'll turn it over to Tim, unless, Nick, you want to, we can go left to right and you want to make any comments first?
I'll let Tim start.
Okay. Tim, the floor is yours.
Okay, if you just give me a moment here, I'm trying to get the slides working here.
You don't have to have signed up either to make comments. You know, when we get to that point, if anybody who wants to comment
The
can
slideshow.
just come up. This is not meant to be a hugely parliamentary type meeting, so it'll be
There we go.
very loose.
You got it? Okay. Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Pat, can you turn these monitors on?
Needs to fire them up.
There you
You said that, okay. I'd like to start off by, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Alderman Larry Rosenthal, who, without his efforts, we wouldn't be sitting here having this meeting, and we wouldn't have this committee, and quite frankly, we wouldn't have the opportunity to have our voice heard on this matter. So, again, thank you for doing that. One of the things I ask of everybody, and I know we're certainly doing that as representatives of the residents for the area, is that everybody keeps an open mind about the project. I know, there's been comments and things, but let's all try to keep an open mind. Nobody's coming in here trying to stop the project or impede the success of what could be a good thing. We just have some issues that we just want to make sure that they're being addressed properly as this project moves forward. I'd like to start by talking about why this is so important that we do it now. Because in a lot of projects that the city does, you can just get into the project, and as things go on, if things aren't going the way you want, you just make changes, and you change your designs, and if you uncover things that, secondary effects that you didn't encounter that are worse than the benefits you're deriving from the project, you can effectively pull the plug on the entire thing and walk away from it. And in most cases, the projects that are done with the MWRD are done that way. I brought some examples. Here's a contract done with Glenview. You know, here's a contract done with Winnetka, contract done with Maywood, and their standard template for doing agreements, IGA agreements. And that's what we're up against right now is the IGA agreement is being prepared by the MWRD, and once it's prepared and it's signed, essentially, there's a commitment being made by the city. The council has already voted to approve the signing of the contract, and what's different about this particular contract, though, it's more in line with the Buffalo Creek contract. In each one of these examples that contracts that have been done before and are done standard with the MWRD, the control remains with the city. In every one of these examples, it's the city that goes out and hires the engineering, pays for the design services, then they submit invoices to the MWRD, and as long as it follows the guidelines of the project, they get reimbursed for it. With this project, it's a little bit different. With this project, because it's involved with Cook County Department of Transportation and another agency, MWRD is actually fronting the money, and they're actually contracting with the engineering firm. So right out of the gate, we don't control this project. Now, there's advantages to that over this, in that you don't have to come out with the money ahead of time. You don't have to spend the money, you don't have to contract the engineering, they take care of everything. The downside of that, however, is as you get into this project, if you uncover something that, some secondary effect that you didn't anticipate, that is the cause, the effect is worse than the benefit you're deriving from the project, you can't stop the project. This project is completely controlled by the MWRD. You know, case in point is the Buffalo Creek example. With that contract, with the Forest Reserve for the Buffalo Creek Reservoir, they essentially paid for the whole thing, and they took control of the whole thing. And one of the troublesome things about that is, as part of that agreement, they also were required to sign a perpetual easement grant. And a perpetual easement grant effectively says, forever and ever, this property is effectively under your control. You can enter it, you can change it, you can do whatever you want with it. And there's a reason for it. It's usually put in there to control and manage the project that they paid for. But at the same time, effectively, we just want to make sure that we're not taking this lake in this area and giving it to the MWRD. You know, I moved to this city 33 years ago. 2 years after I moved here, I joined the Homeowners Association immediately, and 2 years after I was here, we had a vote to donate the property to the city. And at the same time, two other parties were trying to buy the lake. One was the Prospect Heights Park District. The other one was effectively the MWRD. It went by a different name back then, but it's the same group that we're dealing with now. We turned down the Park District primarily because they have very restrictions on what you can do on lakes. For example, you cannot fish in a lake in Prospect Heights. It's owned by the Park District. Well, a lot of people fish on that lake, and that was unacceptable to them. The MWRD flat out told us that what they wanted was a hole to put water in. They needed some place to put their water, and our lake was a perfect example of that. And so we instead donated it to the city. So that kind of initially bothers us, just the sense that, you know, if we're required to give a grant to MWRD, we're effectively gone full circle. We're giving the lake to them. Now, it's been 5 months since we last really talked about this, and the presentation from Sedgwick was in late August. Over those 5 months, you know, we've been exchanging literally hundreds of emails amongst the association members, back and forth. We've been talking to council members, we've been talking to a number of people. And one of the challenges, or one of the things that we were told at a recent meeting was actually by yourself, the chairman, was to get, to unify the group and get power representation from each of the members of the association, so I can effectively come in here and speak on their behalf. And so what I've done is, and it as you can imagine, it took quite a period of time, but I've been able to secure written authorization from the majority of the members that are affected by this project. There are, on Hillcrest Drive, there's actually 3 areas: Hillcrest Drive, Hill Court, Owen Court, and Willow Court. There's 4 areas. There's 12 homes on Hillcrest Drive that are part of this project. Of those, we've got authorization, written authorization from 9. On Hill Court, there's 6 homes on Hill Court. We've got written authorization from 4. Owen Court, there's 7 homes. We've gotten written authorization from 6. And on Willow Road, in the immediate vicinity of the project, there's 9 homes, and we've gotten written authorization from all 9. A total of 34 homes in this group. We've gotten written authorization from 28 of those, which represents 82.4% of the homes. Of the homes that we did not reach on Hillcrest and Hill Court, primarily it was just where we weren't able to get a hold of those people. One of them is actually an absentee homeowner that rents out his home, and,
Tim, we get the point.
okay, we've not been
We'll
able to.
accept it into the record.
Okay.
And we can, these, though, say that you're able to discuss it on their behalf. Did anybody, I mean, usually when you get authority like that, you're going and you're giving them the parameters of what you're gonna do.
We did, and we did it actually in 2 separate letters, which would allow, and a series of letters, which is what I'm about to summarize with the slides, and that's
Okay.
what I'm leading up to. So I ask that we stipulate for the record that.
Absolutely.
That
No problem.
I've done the homework. and
You've
I'm-
done the homework.
you know, and-
I agree, you've got people that have asked you to speak on their behalf. I'm still not sure, I've asked you before about the association, what actually the boundaries, typically with the HOA, there's a map that dictates who is part of the HOA.
Right.
Who was part of it when the property was transferred and whatnot.
Right.
Because just to make sure that everybody's included in that was, or that people are included, aren't being included accidentally.
Sure, and we could do that, I could bring that information that way, if
Appreciate that.
you like, that wouldn't be a problem. So,
Tim, if I could address one of the points that you had asked, and it was in fact the first one, when you asked why now? What exactly do you mean by that?
well, rather than, what I'd like to do is just get the overview and then, quickly go through the whole thing, so I'm not, dragging this whole PowerPoint thing on, and then, I know you guys all love PowerPoint presentations, but.
I told you I'd sit here to midnight if you want.
Okay, so, what I've done is I've tried to summarize, what the issues are and what are the main concerns. And,
Did you have, you said you'd have a handout of the PowerPoint.
I don't have a handout of the PowerPoint, but I do have a handout of some of these slides. You could pass these out if you like. Wasn't sure how they display on the slide, so I did it this way. So, first of all, I'd like to start, just for the record, so people can see what it is specifically we're talking about, because this obviously is televised beyond just the people in the audience, so that I want people that are looking at this to know exactly what area we're talking about. The top section is Hillcrest Lake. The lower, I tried using my laser earlier, but it does not work on a TV screen, so. The lower area is Willow Road. Hillcrest is the road surrounding. The first little offshoot up to the top left is Hill Court. And then the finger that comes down on the upper right-hand corner of that area is the Owen Court area. And those represent effectively the 3 different roads that we're talking about. The only difference between the 3 roads is Hillcrest and Owen are owned by the city, and Willow Road is owned and managed by the county. So what I did was went through all the emails and pulled out all the details of opinions of people wanting, and you got to keep in mind that a lot of these opinions are not just limited to, they don't just send an email saying, here's my opinion. They're buried in, long emails that talk about other stuff, including the weeds and everything else in the lake. So what I first did was try to extract pertinent information that just applies to the road project, to summarize that here. And what became apparent is that we've got really three areas, major areas of concern. Now, one thing that I tried to figure out, of the three areas, what is the common denominator of all these? And these three areas are of such importance that if there is not at least some investigation or some sort of a resolution to those areas, there is zero, nobody is interested or in favor of the road project. They're that significant to these people. The secondary topics that we go through are more, well, by definition, they're secondary, and they apply to specific areas. Some are concerns of Hillcrest Road, some are concerns of people on Willow, some are concerns of people on Owen. So let's address first the major areas of concerns, and the first major area of concern has to do with the fact that there's no silt control provisions for Willow Road reconstruction. Now back.
You're talking construction progress,
No, for
process,
the
or?
final project. I should have worded that differently, but yeah, for the final project, there's no provisions for silt control. Now, Pat, back in 2015, if you remember, when I first gave the presentation about the flashboard riser, which seems like a very long time ago at this point, one of your arguments was that the lake is coming up versus the lake going down. You remember that whole thing, and that it's filling in with silt, and it's entirely accurate. The lake has been filling in, and the bottom has been coming. At the same time, we're still not in agreement 100%. The top is going down, but the bottom is always coming up. And that silt still continues. And 2 years after we donated the lake to the city, your own city engineer was asked to evaluate.
You remember who that was?
Yeah, I didn't bring his name. It was, started with a D.
Sold?
DeSole. Yes, Ed DeSole.
Oh, you're going retro now.
Yes.
You're going way back.
Yeah. This was, but Ed DeSole was asked to evaluate the lake, and because it was a gift from us, and he said, well, go check it out and tell us what you think. And he came back with a dire warning. He said that if something wasn't done for silt control, that the lake would start to silt over, and in a short period of time, he predicted 10 years, he was off, it's been 30, and it's still kind of there, but he says the lake will fill up with silt. And what he was recommending at the time was really something fairly simple. It was putting in a silt, a pit, a hole basically, where the silt would fall into the hole, and a catch basin, and basically every couple of years or every year they come by, just scoop it out, and then all the silt gets managed in that fashion. Nothing was done, and the lake has continued to get shallower. We now have this project that it's another concern, and I'll get specifically why it's a concern, but keep that in mind.
I'm gonna just, for this item, I'm gonna agree with you. I wish we could do some kind of silt control. I wish it wouldn't have to be done where yours is at, it would have to be done at 83, because where the silt comes into that area in the first place is at 83, not at Willow Road.
Well,
so we have the same problem on the other side.
let's get to that, because I'll have some.
Right, but I mean, that's not part of this project. The silt control is not something that's there now.
Yeah, but it needs to be, and let me show you that one.
So that's more of like an ad that you're looking to do to the project.
Well, let me get to that. We'll get to that.
This must be very complicated if it can't.
It's not that
talk about
complicated,
each
but
one separately.
you're jumping ahead of the
All
slide.
right.
Okay.
All right.
The second item is the destruction of the only remaining wildlife refuge area on Hillcrest Lake. Okay, there is an area in the southeast corner of Hillcrest Lake. It's storage area, compensatory storage area 1. It's going to be destroyed as a result of this project.
The reason it'll be destroyed is because it's going to be
for compensatory storage.
Compensatory storage.
We'll come back to that as well. I want to get to these quickly because I want to. The southeast,
right
the
next to
southeast
the top.
corner of the lake.
If you're going towards St. Al's on Willow Road, right before the lake ends. on
We'll
the
show a
left-hand
picture of it
side,
in a minute. Right, we'll show a picture of it in just a minute.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. So, and the third concern, which is could almost be moved up, is there is going to be a 600% increase in the lake outflows. Now, you know, this obviously is a concern, but you remember in 2015, we came to you saying, gee, we'd like to all put in a flashboard riser. We came in, a couple of folks from the NRC came in, and we had this, we thought was a great $400 solution, but it turned out to be not as simple as we thought. But the concern there was that the lake levels were going down, and we wanted to reduce the outflow under dry conditions. Now we're going to increase the outflow by 600%, and in addition, we're going to be lowering the pipe, the level of that pipe. And we'll come back to this one in a second as well. So let me get to the secondary areas of concern.
No, the outflow pipe's not part of it, but there's increases in.
Right, but you're saying that they're lowering the outflow pipe.
I'll get to that. I have a drawing of that
All
as
right,
well.
all right. Do me a
I
favor,
know-
go back to that first. Do you have a printout of this that we can have, or can you get
I-
that to Joe?
I could certainly.
This whole thing?
Yep,
So I don't have to
absolutely.
write
Yeah,
down. All right.
absolutely. Yeah, I'll email it to you, or,
Yeah, email it to
sure, not a problem. Okay, do you need?
No, go ahead.
I can go back.
No, if you email it to Joe, then I'm
Yep.
good.
Okay, so those are the areas that, when I talk to people and we exchange emails back and forth and we looked at the whole globe of things, the whole scope of things, those are the showstoppers. Those are the things that people say, you know what, if we can't solve or do something about these three issues, then we are not interested in the road projects under any conditions, okay? Now, the more specific ones that when I look at the people on Hillcrest, the people on Willow, or the people on Owen, now we get into the secondary of concerns. Now, it doesn't mean that these are any less important, but they're not global. They don't affect everybody. The first three, everybody cares about. These three is obviously of major concern to the people on Hillcrest Drive. And this is a major prolonged construction disruption to homes along Hillcrest Drive, putting in a temporary road and all this other stuff. Major concern of theirs. And we'll come back to this briefly as well. A second concern, and this is specific to not only the people on Owen Court, but the people on the far end of Hillcrest, is the floodwaters are being diverted behind the homes along Owen Court as part of this project. We'll come back to that as well.
Okay.
Okay. Third item is there'll be permanent standing water in the side yard directly to the west of 408 Owen Court, which happens to be the home of one of our council members here, or committee members.
Right. Which, just so I understand what we're talking about, you're talking about the water that is already permanent there, basically.
We're talking about more water.
More water.
More water.
Right,
Yeah.
well, and the.
So are they
just-
raising the level then of the
Hey,
lake? Is
we'll
that,
get to
you
that
should
as
be
well.
happy with that.
But it's on the wrong side of the road.
Right, the
unfortunately.
elevation of the new culverts right in front of our house is lower than the pipe that goes north
And
to the
we'll-
creek.
And we'll get to that as well.
And it's supposed to flow through our backyards.
We'll get to
Yeah,
that.
well,
We'll get to that.
and the elevation in the backyards is higher, so it's just gonna sit there in our yard.
And,
Is that based on the drawing? I
Yeah.
gotta ask this
Based on-
question so I know.
I got the drawings coming
All right.
up. One more slide and we're into the
All
drawings.
right.
I know,
Let's
this is
go.
like Christmas for you, but, okay.
A lot of packages.
Yeah, a lot of packages. Okay, and the fourth item is this, the aesthetic changes to Owen Court caused by the 3-foot road raise and the guardrail, okay? Now picture this, the road is gonna be raised 3 feet, okay? In addition, there's a minimum requirement that IDOT has for guardrails, and it has to put in a guardrail because of the slope. When they get done, that guardrail, that raise will be over 5 feet, okay? I'm 6'4", it'll be this high,
To the top of the guardrail.
to the top of the guardrail, okay? And it's
Not if you're standing at the guardrail, you're talking about from where it's at now.
from where it's at now.
Right, so
Right.
you're
We're not
raising
gonna
it
have a
3,
5-foot
so it'll be up to,
3 feet will be the road, and then roughly 28 plus inches will be the guardrail, but it'll end up being about 5 to 5.5 feet by the time they get done with the whole thing,
okay.
okay? That's an aesthetic concern. I appreciate that, but it's still a concern.
It's a concern, but you gotta, hopefully you can appreciate that when somebody, if we were to redo completely that area, let's say we were to extend Owen all the way to Willow, so the people on Owen Court could come out to Willow Road and not have to go all the way around. You know, if you build any kind of road, you have to build it, we
Right.
can't build anything without being built to a standard, which is IDOT.
And I'm not suggesting we don't build something to standard, I'm just saying that that's a concern.
But I get it, but but do you have a solution for that?
I actually do,
It's okay.
actually do.
In addition, we've also had conversations, not at the council level, but at staff level, about putting in something more decorative than just the standard galvanized steel barrier. So
They get that, but, for example, that's right outside Nick's office window, I believe, okay? Whatever, no matter how decorative it is, it's still 5 feet higher than it is right now. So, if you can appreciate that,
Go
okay?
ahead.
All right.
Because I want to be able to have everybody else comment too,
What-
in case you don't cover their items.
Oh, absolutely. So these are the major ones, and there were some ancillary ones, but when I went back to the people and said, how important is it? Do we need to see if it's important with other people? They said, no, it's just,
Okay.
it's just, but these are the secondary areas. So now what I want to do actually is take a look at the major ones quickly. First of all, the Willow Road issue. The Willow Road issue, this is what it looks like right now, and I wish the drawing was a little more defined, but this is, if you can see the two culverts that are on there, the two existing, there's actually three, they're only showing two in the drawing, but there are actually three culverts there. There's the two that have been identified, one's a 24-inch culvert, and one's a 36-inch culvert.
that's the dash line.
Those are the dash lines at an angle going across the road, okay? So that's how it is now, and this is what they're proposing on doing. Now, you notice they're leaving in the existing ones, and again, they don't show the third one, so they're adding 6, and there's gonna be a total actually of 9 when they get done. The one they just couldn't find because it was buried, but when they went back and reevaluated it, they said it was there. Except the difference is those 6, the originals are, there's
If I could
a
stop.
24-inch and there's a 36-inch. We are putting in 6 5-foot diameter culverts under the road.
Can I pause you for 1 second?
Mhm.
For everybody over there, he's talking about the pipes. The culverts are the pipes that go underneath the road between the slough and Hillcrest Lake underneath Willow.
Okay. So if we received this dire warning from the city engineer, Ed DeSole, back once upon a time, about what would happen if we had a small water flow into the pipe, what do you think will happen when we increase it by this capacity? There's going to be, there's a direct relationship between the suspension of silt material in water related to the speed of the flow. This will increase the speed of the flow, and that silt will carry further downstream, and we will end up with much, much more silt coming into there. There's no provisions whatsoever for doing anything about this. And we've addressed this with Cedric at the last presentation in August when we were in the sidebar. And he, in fact, brought it, I think Alderman Rosenthal asked about it at the meeting as well, before the vote. And he said, well, what are you doing about silt control? And the answer was, it's not our problem. We don't, and not in those words, but essentially, it's not his problem. And I agree, that's not their thing, that's not their charter. They just want to move the water, And here's the concern. Okay, if this was a normal project, and we were in control of the project, and we had gone to Globetrotters and said, okay, how much to do the pre-engineering on this, and we spent $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to start doing some of the engineering. And then they came back and we discovered when we got to the 60% engineering, which is the next phase of the design, there's the 30, 60, and then the 98%. When they get to the 60, they come back and say, oh, we just realized there's no silt control, and it could destroy your lake. You know, if that's enough of an issue, and hopefully it would be, at least it would be to us, the project could be stopped. They could say, okay, then it's not as great of an idea as we thought. If we can't solve this problem, or if the problem is too expensive to solve, at least we know that we can get out of, we can stop the project and we're out the 50,000 or 20,000, which is a lot better than being out 400,000. So the concern that we have is that this project is in our hands, and there's no guarantees that if we come back, and even though, let's say the project, the silt control is an inexpensive solution, and we come back and we discover it at 60%, we go back to MWRD, and he takes it to their board, and they vote on it, and they say, yeah, okay, of course we have to pay for it, it's an add-on, and Sedgwick said that'd be our full responsibility to pay for it. But what if that add-on was not $50,000? What if it was $200,000, $300,000, $400,000? Now we have a $400,000 project that we have a $400,000 unexpected cost. What do you think the council is gonna say when you say, will you vote for another $400,000 so these
I
people?
just want to cut you off, just so everybody can speak. There hasn't been anything you haven't said so far that I disagree with, okay? I might disagree with you on the engineering to say because you increase the size of a pipe crossing under the road, that the dirt then says, wait a minute, there isn't 4 culverts here for me to go through, so I'm gonna just hang out on the south side. I mean, that's gonna find its way. I mean, can we agree that when the water flows over 18 inches over the lake, there's no way right now to mitigate that silt that might be coming across?
Except it's at a much slower rate.
No,
The
it's
silt
at a
is
faster
suspended.
rate. It's
The silt is
suspended in the
suspended.
water. It doesn't care. It's whatever water flow.
The water that the primary, it's, okay, for example, duckweed. The slough has a considerable amount of duckweed during the season. The only time we get duckweed on the lake is when it flows over the road. The road is currently acting as a natural filter for a lot of the floating materials and a lot of the suspended materials. Plus the fact that these pipes are currently half filled with debris. So we're nowhere near the kind of volume of silt coming into the lake that's going to happen unless we put in some sort of a system. Now, let me finish my point, if I could. Here's the thing, and here's what we're asking for. We don't know when the IGA is coming. You know, we thought it would be November, we thought it would be December, it could be March, you know, who knows? I believe that it would be in our best interest to independently go to someone like a Globetrotters who's doing this project anyways, and say, hey, independent of what's going on there, on our nickel, what are we looking at in terms of a cost if we wanted to put in some silt control, just so we know. And if they say, you know, you're not talking about much, 50, 100,000, and then you think, okay, that's something that's acceptable. If the project's 400,000, and if we have to put in another 100,000 to protect the lake, if you're willing to do that, fine. But if they come back with a number and they say it's gonna cost $400,000 or $500,000 more, it's something we should know before we do the IGA, before it's too late. Because I guarantee you later on, if we come back to the council and say, hey, look at this, they didn't put any silt control in, we need another 500,000 for this project, the council's gonna go, we don't have that kind of money, we thought it was a $400,000 project. You know, now the gift doesn't look like so much of a gift. Let's explore it now. Let's do some, and we're not talking about doing the engineering, we're talking about a estimate of what it would cost for a typical silt control project. They don't have to engineer it to specs, they don't have to do the drawings, just give us an idea, just like we did for the Weir. Remember, we came back and it said it's 1.2 million, okay.
I got it. I just want to make sure you expound on all your other, because, I mean, I talked to you today and you wouldn't even give me a preview of what you were going to talk about. So I want to make sure you hit all your topics so I can hear them all. And I get what you're talking about with the silt control. I might disagree with you as to whether or not it's an issue that Globetrotters doesn't look at when they're doing something like this.
They told me they don't.
I would say that,
I talked to the
I bet you a
engineer.
nickel that every gallon of water that flows through that area now, at some point, will get through there anyway, regardless if there's 60-inch culverts. If we had no culverts, if we went and blocked them up, that water's gonna get through there anyway. So I'm not sure, I'll ask an engineer if Usually it's the flow of the water, like Scott said, that disturbs it and puts the silt into the water and it moves. But on the flip side of that, it moves all the way through. It doesn't just stop at you, it goes all the way through to the next detention area. The other thing that you didn't bring up is part of the detention, part of the.
By the way, just at one point.
Sure, go ahead.
I did talk to Globetrotters at that meeting. It's not that they don't normally do that, it's that it's not within the scope of work as defined by MWRD. That's why we need to do it on our own. Sedgwick and the engineer from Globetrotters looked at each other and said, you know, that's something you'd have to take upon yourself. It's not within our scope of work.
Right. But they didn't say they're adding to the issue. So, I mean, I get what you're saying.
They're not evaluating it.
They're not evaluating it because maybe in their professional opinion, it's not something.
No,
they do.
because it's not under their
We'll agree on that.
scope.
Part of what you brought up too was that secondary detention area in the southeast corner. There was another one that's proposed going south of there. There's 4 or 5 of them there.
Actually, I've got the, that's the next slide. Can I get to that?
No, just stop. So when you talk about the lake and what's impacting based on what's coming across Willow Road, there's things being done upstream of that to slow the water from coming through there in the first place. So there are secondary effects like you're talking about. There are secondary effects of the benefits of this project too for the people upstream.
Oh, no, there's nothing to slow the water. These are not wet bottom reservoirs that we're talking about. The one being built at the library is a dry bottom.
It's a dry bottom which will float, which will prevent the amount of water going through at any given time.
In a flood, we're talking
Right.
about normal flows. We're not talking about, it's not designed to be a reservoir. It's not,
No, I get it, but
it's
it's
a difference between a
designed,
detention and a retention.
correct, it's
basically.
designed to slow the speed of the water going from one area to the other.
Wait, okay.
This is our operational definitions we talked about
Okay.
earlier.
Let me get to that. You brought up
All right.
you brought up the area in the corner of the, so hopefully, and we certainly come back to the point of the issue of the compensatory, or the silt control. But that comes from your own engineers back years ago. It's still an ongoing issue, and now is the time to look into it, as long as we're doing the road anyways. If it's a simple thing of putting in
I
you know,
understand.
and it's not expensive, and we know, worst case
I
scenario.
agree with you, we'll look into it.
Okay,
So I just want to make sure you hit all your points.
that's one. Okay. Compensatory storage area 1. This area, and I don't have my pointer. This area is on the southeast corner of the lake. Yeah, it doesn't work on,
TV.
don't hit me with the laser. Okay, this area here, the entire area is trees, currently. Now, it is the only, and there's, I actually went out a couple days ago and I counted, there are approximately 75 mature trees in that area. And this is the only area of refuse for the, any of the larger wildlife, the egrets, the herons, the bald eagle, they all hang out in this area as protection from predators to get out of the sun. And one of the reasons I know that is my wife and I are amateur photographers, and we're constantly taking pictures of all the birds and the wildlife. And 90% of the time, they're either entering or leaving that area. Without this area, when this gets taken out, we're talking about taking out over 75 trees for this retention area. We're taking out another 30 mature trees on Hillcrest for that construction project. This is going to look like a golf course pond. There's going to be we're going to have geese and seagulls, you know, basically flying rats is what we're going to have. We're going to have geese there. And geese don't care. They don't need woods. They don't need anything. They'll go anywhere. So that's a major concern of ours, is because this issue has been bounced back and forth several times. Joan, you and I have talked about this, and I count the number of times, but 4 or 5, 6 different times, it's been your understanding that this area wasn't part of it, but yet, even in the most...
I think they're all
even in the most recent...
they're all in play. All 5 areas are in play.
Okay.
What, depending on what
Right.
what can be gained.
Right,
But I
right.
think if,
But we can't go into this
Right.
project saying it's not going to happen or that it's going to happen. It's
Right.
one of the areas, it's
Right.
one of the 5 areas that's in play.
As defined right now, and I'm just going based on the scope and the engineering plans from Globetrotters and what MWRD has proposed to their board, this is one of the 3 areas, this is area 1. And the major area that would have provided probably the most significant portion is the area just north of Hillcrest Lake, and that's just south of the creek, and that would be west of Walnut Woods and west of the pond over there. That area, to the best of my understanding, and according to Sedgwick at MWRD, is not available for sale. So that means that this area is going to be used, along with the library area and along with 2 parcels of land north of the creek. So this is a major concern. You know, we live there because of the wildlife, because of the nature. And so let's talk about Owen Court. Owen Court is the 3rd and final major roadblock where people say, you know, this is a big issue for us. This is the current design for Owen Court. There's an existing rock line ditch. There's currently a 12-inch culvert that goes under the road, and there is typically some water in the front yard of that area, but a minimal amount of water currently.
All right, as I understand it, we had to put up hazard water signs on
We're not talking
this
about-
year.
We're not talking about flooding conditions.
No, okay. This
I'm
whole
talking about-
project is based on.
No, I'm talking about all the time.
Okay,
We're talking about water all the time, okay?
I'd say, the whole-
It's typically not a dry bottom.
correct.
Okay,
Okay, we'll
okay.
agree with that.
Okay, so what we have here is this is a little bit difficult to see, but if you look at your screens, this is the invert elevation. And I hate to get technical on you here, but the concern that we have is twofold. Number one, and actually in this drawing, they have the existing one incorrect. It's only 12 inches, it's not 2 feet in diameter. But what they have is the invert elevation. And if you compare the invert elevation, which is the bottom of the pipe, which, as you know, water will keep flowing out until it reaches the bottom of the pipe in a dry situation. The bottom of this pipe that they're putting in is 1 foot lower than the existing outflow pipe. That's at 647, this is at 646. So it's a foot lower. That would effectively lower our lake by 1 foot. Now, couple that with the fact that they're putting in 6 of these. There's 6 24-inch, 2-foot diameter pipes going in under Owen that are a foot lower than the existing single 24-inch pipe going up underneath Hillcrest towards the creek. How in the world is this not going to lower our lake?
Because it's pitched differently. It's got a reverse pitch to it that's pitching from the lake and up versus this straight pitch.
I actually have the
Flat
pitch
pitch
on it,
we're
and no, it's not. It's not pitched.
I spoke about it specifically with Cedric.
And I can go through the engineering drawings with you offline. if you like.
We'll get Cedric
Yeah.
to,
Yeah,
we'll make that a
But the-
point on Owen Court to find out about the
But-
pipe and the
but
pitch,
there-
and we'll get a detail on it. for you.
but there is, because
So you're suggesting that then the dumping of that water from the lake would all go into his yard? If you're gonna lower the lake, and you're talking
No.
about the pipes on Owen
Here's
Court,
the
how does
thing.
that? how's
we're
that
not
lower?
talking, we're not talking yet from his point of view. His point of view is the third screen, is the secondary effect.
Where is the water going that's being dumped
The-
if it's on Hillcrest?
The issue is
or
that
on,
it's not
Owen Court?
going in the lake. The issue is it's pouring out of the lake, and the lake is
To
lowering,
where, I guess I'm asking.
behind their houses, actually.
So his house on Owen Court would take this foot of water from the lake, is what you're
Yes.
saying?
Yes, yes,
I would,
yes.
if that's the case, whoever drew this should be losing license, because that's a,
When I brought this
that's
up,
that's like,
when I brought this
doesn't
up,
even make
when I brought
sense.
this up at the meeting, Sedgwick wasn't aware of it. And then I checked with the Globetrotters engineer who's sitting across the table, and she said, yeah, that's correct, we are putting in, he wasn't,
we're gonna get that clarified, so
okay.
we'll get that back to you.
But this is the same question that I brought up 3 times already with them.
I get it, I get it, I
Back
get
in
it.
2015, and it still hasn't been answered.
Got it.
Okay.
We'll get that answer from Cedric ASAP on the pitch of the pipes on Owen Court.
I think it would be worthwhile, rather than translating information, to have Griselda and Cedric come to a meeting.
I think it would be, I mean, I know you say this is on the, this isn't on your list of items. You
No,
talk
no.
about in general, but can you give us your specific, from this meeting, can you go back and take your list? And
This is a
bullet-
specific item.
Bullet point, not, I mean, something that we can have a list of things that can be answered.
Sure,
You know what I'm
absolutely,
saying?
absolutely.
Okay.
But this is, again, this is looking at it from two different standpoints. This isn't looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, there's water in my yard. This is looking at, from the standpoint of, hey, there's no water in our lake. You know, this is,
I get what you're saying, but it would be physically, 1 foot of water, that entire lake would fill his house up to the roof, which it can't do.
no,
because
but
of
it's
the-
not just going to his house. That's the idea. If.
So you're saying they're using his property as a
They're
tributary to take water
using,
from
they're,
the lake?
they've decided, and correctly so, they've decided that the natural water flow of the water from the lake doesn't really want to go north towards the creek. It wants to go east towards Wheeling Road. And if you look at all the engineering specs and all the drawings that they did, when they do the slices of the curvature and the topography, they've determined that the water really wants to go that way. But there's a problem there. And
You don't even have to explain it, it'd be going through yards, I get it. So let's not, I don't wanna,
the water would effectively, and this already happens to some degree in a flooding event when the road gets topped. To some
which
degree.
happens in half-inch of rain.
It-
And that road gets stopped.
Well, I wouldn't say half an inch, no. but-
3/4.
Yeah, a little bit more than that, but the water already goes into the homes, and they get water in their yards, okay? But here's the.
I just have a hard time, somebody stop you, just logically, because I like to think simple. If they're raising the road this 5 feet from the road height that it is now to the top of the guardrail, why would they go through that effort if they're trying to move the water east anyway? They shouldn't even, it wouldn't make any sense to raise Owen even an inch if your goal is to move the water from the lake to Wheeling across his yard to his houses.
Well, no, it's
Is
not.
that what you're suggesting?
No,
or-
it's not, they're not saying that, they're not saying, there is actually another project. There's a much bigger scope of work that was originally chartered to Globetrotters. And there's one called, I think it's the MWCTA-1. And that project actually put in a culvert in the corner of the lake, right in that area at Hillcrest and Owen, and ran a pipe down Owen Court. It's basically a culvert, a long sewer pipe, tied it in, went under Wheeling Road and went right into the creek. That was spectacular. That not only solved the flooding issue on the road, but it also helped with the outflow of the lake, and the invert elevation was higher, so theoretically, because they were talking about removing the existing outflow pipe, theoretically would have allowed the lake to come up just a little bit in dry conditions.
Right, no,
They
I
abandoned
don't
that,
want to talk about that.
but they abandoned it because of the cost.
No, I get it, that's fine, but I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying they're raising the road, that
Correct.
the engineers decided to
3
raise
feet.
the road to try and alleviate flooding on Owen Court. And-
No,
but in doing-
to alleviate a 160-foot section of road that goes underwater, not alleviate any flooding on Owen Court.
But in order to do that, they're putting more water into his property to alleviate that.
That's correct, but they're anticipating that it'll be in an area in the backyards along the fence line where nobody will care. They get a little bit of that
So I
now.
would guess in their calculations, we're going to see the engineering be able to tell us how many gallons or what kind of flow they're expecting
Right,
across.
and now, it can't make its way all the way to Wheeling Road, by the way.
You're in the weeds now. You're getting in the duckweed.
Well, here's an important,
I agree with you. If they're trying to convey water over land, a huge quantity of water over land to get to Wheeling Road, that's something we need to talk about. So, I mean, aside from that, you don't have to pound that point home anymore. I get it. I agree with you. It shouldn't be.
the one point that I want you to take away from this, though, is don't look at it from the point of how much water is in the backyards. Look at it from how much water is not in the lake, because that's the
Right. And
the big issue.
And I'm sure that's I can't imagine they go through this whole project and don't run a calculation of what they're doing differential to the lake. What the lake is now at its normal level, what it is at its 1-inch event, or 10-year, 20-year, 50-year, 100-year event. I can't imagine that that wasn't part of their calculation. That's gotta be one of the most basic things. I mean, we just got done with a a study for
Well, here's the
draining-
interesting,
draining the
when they
land
did all
across the
these
street.
studies, and when they
Yeah.
did, there was no houses in the pictures. They just did a topography. They did it, in fact, one of the studies that was done, which I found to be kind of interesting and probably worth noting, is they said, what if we took out all the flood control devices? What if we just let the water flow, took out all the roads and just let the water, or just let things flow the way they wanted to? And they discovered that one of the biggest reasons that we have flooding in our area really had nothing to do with the restrictions of the water going out. It had to do with the tailwaters downstream. It had to do with the Plains River being higher. It had to do with McDonald Creek, and it's right in their, the engineering study that they did.
So at the end of the day, in order to let everybody else talk, because you've had the floor almost an hour, what is your solution to this? So you're saying if we can raise the roads, raise them, but don't use that as a detention area, that property at the southeast corner, don't use that as a detention area, don't put guardrails up on Owen Court. Is that, when you show us something that you say you have issue with, does it eliminate that and you're okay with it?
Can I make
Or
a
is-
comment
yeah,
real
go ahead,
quick?
go ahead.
I'm very familiar with when we get stuck in there and when we don't, and it would really only require probably about 12 inches of raising the road to allow, and it's only in one, as Tim pointed out, 160-foot stretch on Owen Street before the curve into Owen Court. So, at least from my perspective, doing a more minimal adjustment to that road versus a drastic adjustment requiring a lot more compensatory space for the water, it would be a lot more ideal in my mind. Because really all you need, even if the water's over the road, it's just barely too high to get a Toyota Camry through. Tom
But you're
Comerford down the
talking
street
about-
can get a small SUV through even when it's,
But when you say
fully
just
flooded.
about, you're talking about just a minor, not these biblical events that we have every year, it seems like now. You're talking about when we get 2 inches
No,
of rain.
I'm talking about the
and
highest
Hillcrest
that it's
doesn't
been.
flow.
I'm talking the highest flooding that we've had. We would only need maybe 12 inches max, and we'd still, yes, there'd be water on the road, but we could still get out. And that's the key. That's
Part of
all,
my
that's,
concern
that's,
about your house is that those pipes are under the ground and whether or not it's being addressed, that the outflow of that pipe into your property should only be at a level that is a 100-year event, that it would even think to start to back up before it would cover the street. So it's not my intention to move any water into your area, it's to keep water from your area. So
well,
I agree that we need to look at that.
if just the road surface was brought up 12 inches and that culvert was kept in there, the water would still flow into the same area that it is now.
I think
under the road.
I think the problem, though, is that high point on Owen isn't anywhere, I don't think it's within 12 inches of the high points that need to be on Willow Road. Because you're talking about raising it now from where it's at, but that would still cover Willow Road because Willow Road wouldn't be raised. So as they raise Willow Road, the water's gonna go other places. I think that's why yours comes up so high, because of that differential that's already there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, to say the raise yours 12 inches would fix it, but you're suggesting that they wouldn't do Willow Road, which then would overflow and whatnot. If
I
they
didn't
raise
suggest
Willow
anything
Road-
about Willow
sure.
Road.
No, but I'm saying
I was
it-
just talking about Owen.
It's not, you're talking about one point in the entire equation.
Right. Well, it's
So
right in front of my house. It's the
if
most
they're gonna do
important
something
thing,
with
so-
Willow Road and they make an effect there, is 12 inches enough on your road? I don't know. I don't know that
Well,
answer.
it-
There's gotta be a reason that, these elevations weren't decided to say, let's see how high we can raise it. In their minds, they wanna minimize this, because any extra blacktop, any extra fill, any extra compensatory storage they have to do costs more money. So they're not looking to go beyond, what they have to do. So I get what you're saying. If you were to build, like, I agree, if we.
Like, I
if we
think
were
we
to
can
continue
accept a
Owen-
little water on the road just to be able to get through is really the goal.
If we were
That's
to
it,
take Owen
for-
and go all
for-
the way through
from our
Willow,
perspective.
and that almost become like a wall, I think that would make a big difference too. I mean, at that point, the people from Owen Court could get out to Willow Road if they had to. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but we're looking at the entire system and its effects throughout, not just road by road.
So Pat, you asked, what is it that everybody wants, or what is some of the ideas? What's new into this formula is something that just came up in the last couple months at one of the meetings, and that for the first time we found out that this project could possibly be segregated. That was never part of the discussion before. Once upon a time, we were under the impression that it's all or nothing. And somehow along the way, Joe, that kind of changed, and maybe Sedgwick came back and said, hey, there's a possibility we can do just slice and dice or do whatever's important. I think of the areas that need to be done, I think Owen Court is the most significant. It's the only area where, you know, people have only one way in and one way out. Every other area, if there's a flooding situation where it overtops the road, they have another way to get out.
Well, you still have that section of Hillcrest at the beginning on the south end of it, coming off of Willow there. So you've got, what, 3 houses that are affected by the water there?
Yeah.
And they're crossing their backyards to get to their cars
Okay.
that are parked on Maple.
Yeah, so we're talking possibly an
But you're still
intersection.
gonna have,
Okay.
once you do Willow, you're still gonna have to have a transition to, you know,
But,
to that point.
my point is, if we were to prioritize from our standpoint of view, what's the most important? Right now, it's Owen Court, so that these folks can get in and out. So when we ask them, okay, if we can't get some resolved to the 3 major items here, is it that important that you get in and out that it may affect the lake? They said, absolutely not. We'd rather not affect the lake and have to deal with the water a couple times a year, and that's 100% across the board.
Right, and I've told you on the phone, I have no problem with that. So
Okay.
if we're able to get to Cedric and go to him and say, Cedric, tell us how we pair things off this program, having Willow Road be the only thing that gets done, what can they pair up? Because every time you talk about raising a road to help Owen Court, you gotta remember if the water, I can't segregate in a bowl of water what the height of each area of that bowl of water is gonna be. If I raise
Well,
Owen
that's-
Court,
see,
I'm
that's
gonna
where-
push water further
But see,
west up onto
it's
the
not a
other
bowl of
property.
water. When you,
It's not,
yeah,
okay.
it's not a bowl of water because it's open.
Can you pull up the picture of when it flooded from the?
There's a major area that's not surrounded by road. And that-
Right, but when you look at when it floods,
Right.
it's a circle. Goes up into the yards,
I
goes
got that.
around,
And-
goes onto Owen
And I
Court,
thought we
goes
said
onto
on the call we
Willow.
were gonna pull up flooding photos, but I guess.
No, because you're saying that it's not, you're saying there's islands in there. I'm saying it's flooded beyond the road into the yards. And if we raise Owen,
So if
I'm just trying to get it straight in my head. If we raise Owen, the water that would have went there is now gonna go somewhere else.
so if we raise Owen, it's just gonna flow back and forth underneath Owen. It's not
It's
gonna,
already got the
Right,
culvert.
but
And that's
we
what the
would, when we
compensatory
talk about
storage is
raising Owen, we wouldn't raise Owen if you got a pipe underneath that's just gonna fill it up. I mean, then again, that's the water. That's
No,
the-
no,
Let-
the lake just spills right over the road there. There's the culvert that goes underneath, and then when it floods, it just spills over that low spot, and then it gets probably 2.5 feet deep there to where you just barely can't get through. So all I'm saying is if you brought that surface up a little, kept the culvert the same, the water's still gonna flow underneath. It's still gonna go in that same area in the yards that it is now, and it's a much
It's
smaller.
gonna raise it.
Pat, I'm
And
doing,
if the lake keeps raising, the level in your yard's gonna keep raising if you're connected by that pipe. To me, the biggest thing that's come from this tonight is that whole discussion about Owen Court and the pipes.
okay.
That's the
Well,
only thing in my
let
mind.
me
that's-
do this, because I'd be doing a disservice to the people on Hillcrest and on Willow if I don't also talk about their concerns and their issues a little bit more.
Well, we have some people from there.
Okay.
Let's have,
Let me finish the summary first, if
Okay.
you don't mind.
can you do it?
I can do it as quickly as I can if you
Okay.
stop asking all these questions.
You've had an hour. I've given you the floor. I told
Okay.
Scott it would be 20 minutes if we
Okay.
were gonna talk. I
I'm
didn't know it
sorry
would
you
be an
guys
hour.
have a short schedule, but this is
No,
important.
it's not a short schedule.
This
I
is-
just wanna make sure they could talk.
This is
too.
important to us.
Okay,
Okay, so that's how the people on Owen feel.
Okay.
Is, you know, if you can solve the problem without hurting the lake, we'd like to see it raised, but the people that want to see it raised, and there's
Yeah.
at least 2 or 3 individuals don't want to see it raised at all. But of the people that want to see it raised, the common theme is they don't want to see it raised 3 feet. They'd like to see it raised less than 3 feet. If it doesn't hurt the lake, if it doesn't affect one of those top 3 items, they're okay with it. Let's talk about Hillcrest. Hillcrest, without exception, they are not in favor of the road project. I mean, and it's not just a question of the minor inconvenience. I don't think there's some people here tonight that can get up and speak, because there's a number of people from Hillcrest that could talk. But the general theme that I'm getting is they don't know why we're doing this for Hillcrest, because Hillcrest is not in the same situation that Owen is by any stretch of the imagination. And the fact that they're causing all this disruption to their properties, the fact that they're losing, for example, some very mature trees in their front yard, these are the cost benefit analysis.
All right, but like you and I talked on the phone longer than we should have, because I was at work and had to get some stuff done, but we talked about how unusual, how, you know, I get this sense that that I really have to ask all these questions and want to hear from everybody else, because the main theme in Prospect Heights is, it was roads and flooding.
Right.
Roads were taken care of, now it's flooding. Everybody comes to us, I got water in my culvert. If we have people that their culvert is just wet,
Right.
don't forget about standing water. If the culvert's wet, they want drainage to take that water away so it dries. Stop, let me go on. So it's unusual for us to hear somebody say, you know what, don't spend that money to fix the area. I understand what's gonna happen, but I don't wanna do it because it's a disruption and it's gonna affect how I see the lake. I have a hard time. If everybody is like that and they don't mind if it floods 8, 10 feet from the road up into the yards, there's nothing I can do about
Right,
that.
well, we can certainly let them speak for themselves.
So I think that's what we need to do, because
Right.
for my own sanity, I gotta hear other people tell me that they don't want the water improvement. They don't want the flooding improvement done. Because I know you might have this from them, but until I hear, is there anybody here who lives on Hillcrest that would like to talk about it? No, come on up.
My name is Mike Cyrus. I'm here with my wife Patty. We just actually purchased the home, and we're on 420 Hillcrest. We're actually on the corner property of Hillcrest and Owen. And initially,
Across Hillcrest? Oh, yeah, obvious.
yes, yeah.
So how long have you been there, just like curiosity?
We closed in May, so 6 months. So essentially, we saw the
So
first
you saw
flood.
some water.
Yeah, and it was a concern. When we moved there, we're like, oh my God, you know, what did we get ourselves into? But in talking with some of the neighbors, they said it hasn't been this bad for like 20 years. And I mean, I did my own research in what Tim presented, and I've seen, you know, just a few seasons so far. Haven't been here for spring yet, but I'm trying to understand as best as I could, you know, the technicalities and everything of the project. And in my opinion, I mean, I don't know what the repercussions would be in raising, at least starting at the base of raising that street to 12 inches. I mean, I think that'd be a good starting point. But to go in, to address the issue at hand, me personally, I mean, yeah, the water does creep up to our property, but to no concern where, you know, our basement's flooding or, you know, the crawl space is inaccessible. It's kind of at a perch on the property, and it does come up a little bit to where it washes out the mulch from under the trees, but I mean, in looking at the presentation overall, it's something I could deal with, basically. Is it a concern for somebody that can't access their homes? Yes. But what's being presented here is a big concern, because there are secondary effects that I simply would want to address are basically looked at. And
What are the secondary effects that you're concerned with?
essentially what Tim brought up, I wouldn't want to see the guardrails placed. And raising the road that tall and putting guardrails in, it looked like a state route. You know, it would take away from the aesthetics of you know, the neighborhood, the property.
But what if it wasn't a galvanized guardrail? It was something of a timber or something more aesthetically pleasing? I mean, something that fit the area, if you will.
If that would be the only thing, and not taking into account taking down trees or somehow altering the lake to where, say, it could potentially dry out or the levels could become lower, I think there's more to it than, you know, just putting up guardrails.
Well, as far as the level goes, I mean, they've always said, just like they're not doing anything for the silt, that they are not doing anything to affect the level of that the lake. Maybe we need Cedric to provide a letter saying that they're, But, you know, I heard Tim has said a couple times that this project will forever change the normal elevation of the lake. And, you know, I sat in the meeting, and Cedric said, you know, that's not what they're doing. They're not changing the lake level, they're just preventing the roads from flooding over. So, I think we need to get more information as to what their plans are for changing the elevation of the lake, which I'm pretty certain is not their intent, or what they're gonna do, and get that back to everybody. We'll find out about the guardrails too. But what else? I mean, is there,
If I could make one comment though, you know, you had made mention and Nick had made mention of, you know, it being, the possibility of raising it 12 inches versus 36. The 36 is based on that 100-year event. And as you lower it, it just lowers the events it's gonna protect you against. So, I mean, if you're comfortable with a 50-year event, yeah, you can lower it. 20-year event, you could lower it even more. 36 takes care of the tsunami, if you will.
which we had last year. I mean,
Right, and
we just had a report on another flooding project we're doing, and just by chance, they had when our big events were, and last year we had a 4.6-inch event that was in a 100-year event. So 100 years doesn't really mean 100 years anymore, it's
But to
every other year.
say, hey, we haven't seen it in 20 years, well, we all know that's true. That's not true.
Well, one of the things we gotta point out, though, is
If
that.
I could finish my piece?
Go ahead.
But it's not truth that we haven't seen it in 20 years, because we've seen it several times over the past decade. You know, does it happen every year? No, it doesn't. But you saw it, and it does happen. Go ahead.
One of the things we have to clarify is that some of the issues you're talking about is flood control issues. Your property, if I'm not mistaken, you live on the corner of Owen and Hillcrest.
Hillcrest, right.
And you never have access problems going to your property. You're not really in the area that we're talking about. You have water that creeps onto your property, but you never, if I understand correctly, the owner of that property has never had a problem getting in or out of that property.
Right, I mean, we could go up Owen Drive
Right.
the other way around if we needed to.
So the problem with the flooding on Hillcrest that we're talking about, and this is specifically Hillcrest discussion, I think at this point, is further down along the curve, more by Ken's house and down further down there. As far as water creeping into your yard or creeping into your basement, this will have a zero effect on that. This has nothing to do with the water
Into
level.
the yard?
This has nothing to do with water, it doesn't take any houses out of the floodplains, it doesn't put any.
No, this, going back to our operational definitions here, Tim. This is the purpose that they're raising, you make it sound like they're raising the road, and the high mark, which I call the wood chip mark, because when it goes through, the wood chips, when the water goes
Right.
down, shows where the water went.
Right.
You're saying that's not gonna change if they do this road?
He doesn't live on the road that's
No,
being
no,
raised.
no, 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 we're talking just in yeah, he is, Hillcrest is
No, no,
being raised.
well, his house, his driveway though,
But
his
you're-
access to his street.
Just to
is
make
up
sure,
Owen.
because I can't let you get away with saying things that people hear and maybe don't understand fully. You're saying that the water level, when we get a 100-year event, after this event, the water will still go as far from what is the edge of the street up to their house now as it will when the project's done?
Yes,
the culverts underneath
Absolutely.
Owen are
Yep,
gonna allow the water to
absolutely.
flow right up our yard, the same.
100%.
Why would they, let me ask you this again, just a dumb question. Why would they spend all that money raising the road if that's what's gonna happen?
Because it's not about the water creeping up towards the house. It's not taking, for example, Ken Sayek's house out of the floodplain that it.
This is
it's-
never, it was never
it's-
intended to be a floodplain
So it's not gonna
project.
affect either positive or negative where the water goes. It's just taking the road out of there. That's what the compensatory storage is for, because you've taken up that mass and you gotta put the water someplace else. It's gonna have a neutral effect on the flooding.
But the water going to the yards comes from the lake. It doesn't.
No,
We need that picture, Joe,
no.
so we can see that circle.
Just in clarification, we only have Tim's.
Okay.
Tim had mentioned his preference was to have his, because if we did the other ones, we might lose
Okay.
things or so. So
That,
just wanted to
I
know.
completely disagree with you. If you saw the picture from last year's event, or it was the year before,
This water that comes from the flood, all this road project is doing is taking the roadways out. We're not increasing, we're lowering the lake level, but we're putting that water.
that's not, what Cedric said, we're not lowering the lake
But-
or
okay,
increasing the level.
By the
of
way,
lake.
when he made that comment during the presentation to the city council, it was before he realized that they were putting in the 6 outflow pipes. It was afterwards that he discovered that in our meeting. But he
Okay.
wasn't aware of that at the time.
Okay. We will get Cedric to clarify
That
that.
would be
But
appreciated.
it doesn't make any sense to me if the road is higher and the water is running up from the lake, how then they will have water running up from the road to their house.
Well, because that water under Owen is gonna flow out the same way.
We're
Nothing's-
talking about Hillcrest.
Well, but even still, the water's gonna just
It's gonna
it's
have
go
a
everywhere
neutral
from
effect.
underneath that.
Right, but,
It's gonna be able to flow from underneath the road.
so you're suggesting then that there's gonna be a 3-foot difference between the road and the immediate side of the road next to it on Hillcrest?
There's gonna be a 3-foot increase from the existing road.
Right.
And then it's gonna taper down.
Correct.
And that's why they need the guardrail.
No, I'm talking about Hillcrest, there's no.
Oh,
guardrails
Hillcrest.
on
Oh, Hillcrest is not going up 3 feet. Hillcrest is going up 2 feet on the average.
Okay.
But again, just to clarify, your house is not particularly affected
I'm
positively.
gonna
or
grant you that, so we don't get into
Okay.
getting into details about where he lives and whatnot
Right,
at his house.
right.
I agree,
It's
there's more of
further
a
on
problem.
during the
Correct.
curve where they
Goes-
sometimes have
Goes
problems getting in
further
and
south
out.
and west is the bigger
Right.
problem. Correct, I agree with you there.
Right.
So if I was you two and didn't have a big water problem, I'd say, I agree with you. It doesn't have an impact on you.
Yeah,
So I get what you're saying. It doesn't flood up to your house as badly as it does.
yeah, somebody else, right.
Did you have any other concerns you wanted to talk about, though? We don't want to.
No, I mean, the 3 that were brought up by Tim we're weighed enough to be concerned. Obviously, I'm not gonna go into it because it stands alone to speak that we obviously purchased the property because it's like a wildlife retreat there. It'd be really sad if there were any changes done to any of, the trees or haven't trickled down to the wildlife and things like that, or have there be any type of, again, major aesthetic changes to where, it doesn't look like it is anymore. And, maybe I'm not as affected on Hillcrest as maybe other of the, members here, but I certainly could say that I could deal with whatever, water I do get on the property.
Okay.
But
What
I
are your,
appreciate
what are
that.
your
That's-
views of the prolonged construction, though?
I,
It would suck, we have a baby on the way, so let me just say that, it sucks. One of the reasons we overpaid for the property about $30,000 just because of the wild look to it. So I think where we're located, it's strictly aesthetics
that brought us to the area. It was all aesthetic. I mean, when we purchased the property from the previous owners, they had the price way up there. And they had it on the market for a while for that reason, because nobody saw the value of that property there. And over time, when we actually came to look at it and got a chance to really, spend some time in the area, and now I work in the area, we saw it as justification enough to pay what the asking price was, and then it became an issue of later getting an appraisal and then getting the mortgage to later suffice for that, because naturally, nobody's going to account for the lake increasing the value of the property. But as going back to your, initial question, it would, for somebody that's directly affected, like this individual, to me, again, I don't live on Owen, that wouldn't be my point in commuting at all, but for somebody that might benefit from that, I mean, I could say that I could live with that type of construction. But I mean, to redo all of Hillcrest, I mean, again, maybe I shouldn't be the one to speak, as, some individuals here that have maybe been there for 15, 20 years, but I mean.
Well, if it comes to doing something with Owen, it's going to impact Hillcrest, because you're raising up Owen, and it's got to taper into Hillcrest at some point, and that's going to be right in your front yard.
In the
Come on
middle
up.
of Owen,
Come on up.
in the middle of Owen, there's a sag.
No, I
You
know
bring
it,
up the
I know it all
middle,
too well.
it doesn't raise the end where it connects to Hillcrest.
He's correct. If you raise it 3 feet, then it has to taper. If you only raise the 160-foot section, it doesn't need to taper that much into the adjoining road.
Right, but,
Right.
I mean, I understand everybody, whenever anybody looks at anything, I can tell my doctor what he's doing wrong. It doesn't make me, an expert on medicine. So, I mean, when these guys look at this, they're not doing it from the standpoint of saying, how high can we raise it or whatever. There's a methodology for
right.
it. I mean,
They-
there's a reason they're doing it. And-
They started with the premise that they would raise it high enough that you'd never have a flood on the road.
Right.
And we don't need that.
Yeah,
We don't
it's
need that. That's an overkill. That's an
But I
overkill.
guess the main thing we gotta find out, I mean,
Could you go to the microphone?
my opinion is that's not an option for Willow. Willow is a major thoroughfare.
Talking about Owen.
Correct, no, I agree. But I just want to hear from you guys that you're okay not doing the project. I have to feel very comfortable with that because this is very foreign to say, people are saying, let my street flood. It's just,
Well, he's
No,
not-
no,
he's not
see-
saying that.
Well, I
but
think,
they're not, let's get it straight too. MWRD's not gonna come in and hot patch, 180-foot piece of road.
We're not talking
and
about
try
hot
and-
patching.
But they're gonna do what they wanna do. So we gotta remember.
What
this
we're
is
saying
not-
is there's something in
this is
between
some-
the 3 feet, and
What if there isn't, I guess is what I'm
then we
saying.
need to know, but
Okay.
the discussion needs to go on.
No, but I just wanna make sure that if there isn't, that everybody is okay with that. That everybody's
I'd
okay.
rather, if it's gonna put the risk of the aesthetics of the lake, if it's gonna put that at risk, then I would say no, and I live right there. It is a pain. Yes, we gotta trudge through the front yard with rain boots on, but it's not that frequent. It probably, this last few years is probably way more than what would normally be the case.
As
We
they
had-
said
you-
5-10 years
well,
ago.
But, just from people historically living there, they, hey, in 20 years, we haven't seen it this bad, so, and I agree with Mike's comments about how the aesthetics is exactly what drew us to, I told that story at the last city council meeting. We paid full price for the house without question.
Right, but going to what
Because-
you said about.
because
I
the
get
lake
that,
and
I
the
get that,
and the
but going to
refuge.
what you said, if we follow the logic that it wasn't that bad 20 years ago, now all of a sudden it's exponentially growing, I would say that you'd want to do something about it.
Well, I mean,
We're not gonna
what's
affect
to say it's
we're
going
not
to
gonna affect
exponentially
what's-
grow? Do we think
That's
the
what's
weather
happening.
patterns
I mean,
are changing that much,
No,
or it's
but
not going to
If we're
taper
going with the
back off?
premise that it's only gotten bad in the last 10, 20 years, and before that it wasn't bad, to me, it says it's something that's moving in a different direction. MWRD's not gonna come back 5 years from now and say, oh yeah, you know what, guys, it did get worse, we're gonna do this. This is a grant. This isn't like something that we could just go to MWRD and say, hey, guys, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, we need to do this project. Unfortunately, there are time constraints, and you talked about the pressure of the time constraints, but that's because it's somebody else's money doing the project, not the city. So that's why there is this pressure, and
So- Okay.
I just want to make sure I'm okay here and that you guys are okay with it, because I'm okay if you're okay.
Well, like I said, if it was, Len, what Nick said, if you raise the road 12 inches or 18 inches, less than 3 feet, what you're doing is you're decreasing the time that the road is flooded, and you're also lowering the flood level by 1.5 feet over the entire time span of the flood. So when it's 2 feet, now it would be 1 foot.
No, I get
When
it.
it's 3 foot, it would be 2
You're
foot. When-
partially fixing the problem, but what if?
Well, no, you're fixing it so that it's passable. It's not a problem.
So if it's, okay, so
That's what we were
you're saying
saying.
some water's okay.
That's what
Yes.
that's what I was
So-
saying.
But
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, we didn't give them the standard to say what to do it to. If MWRD, I gotta ask you a worst-case scenario, because there's not gonna be 5 meetings to be able to go back and forth with this on. If MWRD says, no, we can't just do little parts of this, we either have to do all of Hillcrest and do it the way we're showing it, or we're just doing Willow Road, are you okay with that?
Well, first of all, why would they say that they're not taking
I don't know
input?
why. I don't know why. They drew this up in the first place, so
Pat, could we ask the city administrator, maybe he hasn't had a chance to talk about this at all, you've been in contact with them, they've opened up the possibility, I believe, of doing parts of it, what was your?
Well, and thank you, Tim. To clarify that, because our discussions have been the possibility of uncoupling Willow Road from the rest of the neighborhood. I don't know the answer, because I didn't ask about within the neighborhood, if we could do Owen, but not Hillcrest and so that's a different question. But they are receptive to the idea that we could do Willow and not do the neighborhood.
Okay. And while you still got the floor, could you update us on what the status is of the compensatory storage areas?
Right, and that, to go back to your
And if I could,
initial concern
I've got
about that
pictures-
corner.
I've got pictures of them real quick.
Right.
Just go through them. This is, and then if we could just talk about them for a second. This is compensatory storage area 1, which is the one we're concerned about at the corner of the lake. This is compensatory storage 2, and you probably recognize this as the area behind the library. And this would be a dry bottom pond area with, actually with a weir in there, which is something they said we couldn't put in our lake, but they're putting one in there. And there's the baseball field and the library there. That's area 2. This is area 3, which is the largest of the areas. This represents over 5,000, almost 5,500 cubic yards of material. And this is actually the easiest one to develop because it's already low, so they don't have to take out a lot of extra material because it's already low. The other ones, they have to take out a multiplier of the material because it's already starting high. This, to my understanding and everything that I've heard, is this is not available for purchase. The owner does not want to sell it. It also involves part of the Walnut Woods, removing part of Walnut Woods there. And then 4A is the area, you can kind of see it outlined there. That's north of the creek. All we've done is slide up north there. That's the creek below. And I don't even know who owns that. Maybe Joe could fill us in on that. And then 4B is immediately adjacent to it. That's a little chunk off to the left there. So those are the areas that are being examined,
Right.
or were being examined.
And I think, Tim, that goes back to, and this was before I started here, but I think initially when they came out, they identified, those are 5, right? Count 4A, 4B or something.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
there's
5,
5.
right.
And as my understanding is, that's identified, because there's not a lot of open space in Prospect Heights. So they identified 5 that would work, that are within this area this basin that would be effective. And then they also did calculations as how much each area would store. Some are obviously larger than the others and so forth. The latest I had heard, because you're concerned about that corner piece next to the lake, and the Natural Resources Commission has been concerned about that as well, that if we can get these other ones, these other 3, we will have the capacity to move forward, and that corner wouldn't be needed. I'll verify that.
But Joe, isn't part of it too that if part of the compensatory requirement is because of Hillcrest? I mean, if they know if they're going with just Willow or just Hillcrest, that would change the amount of compensatory storage.
Oh, that's a good question.
Dramatically.
Yeah, does that,
Right.
what's
So we
the
wouldn't
difference
even
on,
need-
you're right.
right.
That's
So that's why,
another,
right.
does that change the
And
calculation?
then, yeah, going on Owen up to 12 inches versus 3 feet would be probably a
Yeah.
large difference there
Right.
too. Which is, the 12 inches roughly is really what's needed.
Yeah.
I mean, the 3 feet is like, that's like the tsunami you're talking about,
Yeah.
and nobody
To
cares
answer
about
your
that.
question-
We're gonna understand we can't drive through in those events,
To answer your question, the fill volumes for Willow by itself is a requirement of 1,350 cubic yards. For Hillcrest and Owen together, it's 3,650, so it's substantially more cubic yards of compensatory storage are required
for Willow.
for Hillcrest and Owen together. So they didn't split out exactly what Owen's portion was, but I imagine Hillcrest is probably the largest portion of that. So I guess these are some of the things that we'd like to start exploring. First of all, is it severable, and if so, what pieces can we segregate? If the community on Hillcrest, and we'll, so far, they've indicated to me they're not in favor of it, but if we go around and it's absolutely not in favor of it, and we take that off the table, that changes the dynamics of the compensatory storage requirements, it changes our cost, it changes a lot of things. Is that an option? I think the important thing is now is the time to start having this discussion, because once the IGA is signed, it's out of our hands. So let's do the stuff now.
I agree with you. That's the first thing that has to be asked is from a Cedric, is how we could parcel this if possible. Because, are they willing to modify their design of everything but Willow? Sounds like they've already
said they would.
Will they be willing to segregate
But in
Willow?
3
No,
pieces.
They have talked about taking it from a 100-year event to
A
something less
50-year.
than that.
And if this were to reduce the cost significantly, then could the issue of the silt control then be examined and possibly be added into
It
the
doesn't-
budget for this?
It doesn't necessarily address cost to us.
Right, that's the
Right.
whole thing about this
It
project.
lowers the cost for MWRD and the county.
Right.
You know, we're subject to a percentage.
Percentage
Yeah,
of the
but
total.
percentage-wise, we're still gonna go down as well,
We have
right?
minimal.
Right, if you cut the project in half, it cuts our
There are
400
some-
down to 200.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
are
so
some
it's
fixed costs
direct
that we're
proportional.
responsible for regardless of how this project works, so. it's-
But to answer your question, no, there's no reason why we couldn't look at doing that too.
The other question I'd like to have answered is possibly to Dan Peterson, and this has to do with the difference between a floodway and a floodplain. Currently, the IDNR, who's one that determines how much compensatory storage you need, only requires 5,000 cubic yards of compensatory storage. It's because of our own internal city compensatory storage requirements, we require a higher standard. And those are designed for people putting structures in their yards and cement, pieces in their driveways. Is there some flexibility there since this is a different sort of project? Because we artificially have raised the requirement for compensatory storage by 50% ourselves. So we can get it down to 5,000. One of those pieces by itself is 5,000 cubic.
But the problem, you talk about secondary effects.
Well, that's why I want
We
Dan-
could never, if it was up to me, we'd do all 5 of these compensatory storage areas because we don't have enough
You
as a
never have
city.
enough.
We're not even close. If
Well-
this city was built today, there'd probably be a third less houses.
I'm not an engineer, that's
because of
why
compensatory
I
storage,
said,
so-
let's ask the building.
Right, but I would not be in favor of reducing the compensatory storage requirements that we have as a city, because we as a city have a bad water problem in the first place. So we don't want to go filling lands to push water somewhere else,
It's,
because it wouldn't be your neighborhood that
we're
would
not,
be affected by not having.
no, it's not apples and
Time out.
apples though.
The compensatory storage is not to help you, it's to help your displacement of water other places.
And we're not talking about,
Okay.
it's not apples and apples.
Okay.
One definition is designed for residential improvements to their home. This is different.
This is, we will never have enough storage, compensatory storage in Prospect.
Can we pose the question
Never.
at least?
We can pose it. People ask us that all the time when they're building projects about not wanting to stick to the 1.5 times, but we don't.
People, but this is a road project controlled by an engineering firm.
But you're
that's gonna
still-
have
But will you grant me this? If we don't do the 150, 50% of that water's going somewhere else?
No,
No, okay.
because it's a difference,
It's math.
it is math.
If I fill with
If I
1
could-
yard of
if I
dirt,
could use this
if I
ex-
fill with 1 yard of dirt, that's gotta go somewhere else.
If I can use this as an example,
Okay.
really quickly, a bowl of water. You put a rock in the bowl of water, water's gonna flow out, okay? That's the definition that the IDNR uses for how much additional capacity you need to catch that water. Ours is like stacking a second rock on top of that. No additional water is flowing out, but we want to be covered for the 100-year
But to use your
flood event.
example, our bowl's already full. So when you drop that little bit of
Our
water,
bowl is not full.
we live in different towns then, because I have no idea what you're talking
The,
about.
the,
when
the
it comes to
federal,
water.
IDNR, the state government, they all go by the
They have a
standard.
would you agree that's a standard for every acre of Illinois that IDNR is saying? And
Yes.
that, would you agree that some areas are wetter than others? So that the impact of filling it is gonna have a bigger impact somewhere else down the line?
It's important.
Some places, if I'm 800 feet above sea level, and we're only 450 here, what I dig at the top of the hill doesn't need any compensatory storage, right? But when you're digging in a bowl like we are here,
I think,
it's a big deal.
I think.
That's what got us
No.
here in the first place.
I think it's worth asking, because not only am I asking, but even in the 30% preliminary designs, Globetrotters intends on asking us if we'd be willing to loosen
Every
those
engineer
standards.
always does.
Okay,
They always do.
because they say it's common practice within the communities.
Common practice
And,
to ask.
and we should ask them, well, in these other
Absolutely.
communities where you've done this, have you had problems? Would they be asking us if they thought we would have problems? Anyways, let's pose that question.
You're hitting the nerve with that, because we don't have enough in the first. If it was up to me, even if they don't do Hillcrest, I would still like to see them do all 5 of these compensatory storage areas, because it's only gonna help us as a city, absolutely down the line.
So-
no doubt about it.
So how do we then,
Let me clarify that we're not gonna use all five.
how,
And that's only because of money. That would be the only reason why we wouldn't do it.
No, that's the only reason you wouldn't do it.
Somebody's gotta watch that money.
so going back to the major three items, is there anything that we can do now as a committee to start investigating possible workarounds or possible solutions or possible information about, for example, the silt control? Or do we need to use that compensatory storage area? Or you've already mentioned, talking about, is that gonna increase the flow and lower the lake, which is a major deal? Can we agree as a committee that those three items, moving forward from this meeting, we should start investigating and talking to the appropriate parties?
There's
about?
no reason that the city administrator can't contact Cedric to get those three questions asked and get a response.
Because the other ones are dependent on those. Once those are starting to have some dialogue,
Well,
then,
I think let's rank these in order of importance. I think the most important thing that we have to find out is this project, given the timeline, can we segregate it to different parts? What are we allowed to do? Are we allowed to separate Willow from the rest of it, which it sounds like we already have that answer, but we'll get him to clarify it. And to what extent are they willing to
modify.
lower the standard? I wouldn't change Willow Road, that's not gonna change from a 100-year event. But if you're saying you wouldn't mind going to a 50-year event on Hillcrest, we can ask that question, because that's how they're gonna
Right.
base this. So we'll ask if we can go to a lower standard, a 50-year event instead of the 100-year event on the other streets outside of Willow. And I think that question will dictate whether the other ones are even askable, because if they're saying, no, we gotta do this to a 100-year event, otherwise we don't put our money into it, because they've got their standards too. They're not gonna like partially go and take care of it.
I would like to see these three items handled concurrently with that, because time is of the essence on this thing. There's no reason why we can't start having a
I
dialogue.
agree, he can, but in my mind, it's the separation of the projects, if that's something that they're willing to do, because if any of the others come back negative, then the projects would have to be separated. So if they can't separate the projects, if they said, no, we can't modify our standards to only do partial,
I
which you
get
wanna do,
that.
then
And,
it doesn't make any
and
sense.
it gives us building blocks to work with. If we don't do a 100-year standard on Owen Court, that reduces the compensatory storage requirement. Maybe that'll help solve item A of using that compensatory storage that we're concerned about. If we don't do Hillcrest, because the folks decide they don't want to do it on Hillcrest, then that's dramatically lowers the storage requirements, which again, could help item A and some of the other cost
Well, we can
factors.
agree that the chances of doing all of this and not using the Hillcrest storage, some of that's not really possible. If it's a full-blown project, we're gonna barely have enough to compensatory storage, if everything works. I mean, we say we have the ability to get all those, until we get them, we don't have nothing.
Exactly.
So-
In fact,
We know that one's probably the easiest one to get.
there are different
It's
sizes.
actually not.
It's owned by
because-
two people. There are people that own the lots, believe it or not, that go into the lake.
Right, there's
They
two-
pay
there's-
taxes every year.
two
thank
city
God.
lots. Well,
I don't know
actually-
why they do that.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah,
How you could own that lot
Right.
and pay $2,000 or $3,000 a year in property taxes.
they've actually got it reduced, they got it reduced.
Much less than
Yeah,
that?
yeah, hundreds of dollars now,
It's crazy.
because they realized it was underwater, so.
But I guess they'd be willing sellers.
And which raises another question, do we really think that it's optimistic and realistic to use a budget number of $75,000 for acquisition of all this compensatory storage? I think that's reasonable.
I think some of the other governmental agencies aren't looking to make money off selling their property. They work with us, so.
Being
I would
who,
think,
the
I would think the
Prospect
Prospect Heights School District.
Would we have to
property,
purchase those, Joe, or?
I don't
No,
believe
those
it.
would be through agreements, and there would be certain conditions. We've had discussions with our fellow agencies.
So the only thing we'd be required to buy is the personal, private property. The
Right.
property north of the creek, is that private property?
It's all private
Yeah.
property.
It is private property.
Yeah.
And that's not the same owner that owns, that's not Mr. McLennan that owns the property below that, is it?
If we're gonna start discussing property acquisition,
Right,
I'd
that should be
prefer
off.
that be an executive
Sure,
session.
absolutely.
Um,
I'm just
But-
talking ownership, just so we
Yeah,
know who did.
but the
But
part
it
that
it is private then.
Right, correct. But that's a good point that both of you have raised. To go back to your initial question, the $75,000 is a plug number, plus or minus. It's not complete, but for budgetary purposes, we need to reserve something. The point about gathering all this, that's probably the biggest contingency. If we're not able to get this, then there's no other alternatives, or relax from the standards, which, that's a different issue.
So we'll have Joe get the answer to those three first pertinent questions.
And I'm gonna see if I can get both Cedric and Griselda from Globetrotters, because my feeling is if I come back with a written statement, there would be back and forth, so it probably would be worthwhile to.
Pat, if I can get some clarification from you, when you're talking about separating the projects, are you talking about separating them being a Willow Road project and a Hillcrest Owen project? Or are you talking about just reducing the scope of an overall?
Well, I think that goes to separating it. I mean, to me, separating it is changing the standard. I mean, I don't want to change this, I guess I'd say separate, because I would not want to change the standard for Willow Road. I don't want to go to a 50-year and say, okay, every third year, we're going to flood over the road. Willow Road's got to be fixed, and that just has to happen. But if they're willing to relax the requirement to go to a 50-year on everything but Willow Road, to me, that's still a segregation. You're saying one's to one standard, the other's to the other. I think part of the problem you're going to have, no matter what happens with that Owen Court, they're going to want to put guardrails up if they touch it. So, I mean, we're going to get to other issues.
It's just the current standard.
It's just the
when you're
current
working
standard,
against
right.
water.
It's like when you're building a house.
Only
you
if it's
build-
a 3-foot drop-off.
I don't know if that's the case, but that, whatever their standard is, we'd either have to accept what they tell us or
Right.
reject the
Can
work.
we agree to at least ask an engineering firm, I'm assuming Globetrotters, to give us a ballpark, what they think it would cost for some sort of a silt control solution?
Because that's not even within the project itself, and MWRD wouldn't even, I don't believe they would even do it as part of their project.
They
even
said
if-
they would.
Even if we reimburse them.
No, they said they would, but it'd have to be voted on by the,
Let's get those other three, because again, we can't do anything if they tell us they're not gonna, willing to change the standards to go from 100 to 50 year.
And Tim,
Or-
I might have a different understanding. I've spoken with Cedric about that also, and he's been very, very clear that MWRD's interest is as a flood control project. As far as the restoration of the lake or quality of the lake, that would be in the cities.
right, but what would happen is, and we talked about this as well at the sidebar, he said what would have to happen is we would have to do the engineering effectively, find out how much it costs, give him the details, he takes it to his board, they vote on it, they'll implement it, we pay for it.
Right, but if they're not willing to, let's find out about the three major things first, because frankly, I mean, to tell you where I stand on it, I can get not doing it to the standard, I can get not doing it at all if the standard, if you don't want to even do that, if they come back and say, no, we have to do it to a 75-year standard, and that's too high for you, and they want to scrap it, I get that, but regardless of what Willow Road does to that, you know, I'm not willing to let Willow Road go. I mean, that's just too big a deal for it.
And because it's so important, that's to you and to everybody apparently at this dais, that's why it's important for us to know, by doing that, since you guys are so insistent on doing Willow, can we start looking into, since that seems to be the one that you really insisted on moving forward, can we at least take a look at doing some,
Well, I think what we need to do is not just
Engineering
look
on it.
at doing the engineering on the physical part of a triple basin to try and
Yes.
keep that out. If they
Generally, I
come
mean-
back to us and tell us that, you know, that, you know, if it's too expensive to do, or we won't be able to mitigate the problem, or the cost to do it's too high, I think maybe we need to look at what actually happens with the silt. Do we have an issue with the water flowing? Is it gonna change because of the road before we talk about building a structure? Will affecting this road affect the amount of silt that's going in there? I think is the first question. If you're asking,
they've already said it will.
who's
Yeah,
they?
Globetrotters.
Globetrotters?
Yeah.
In their report?
I talked to her on the phone
Okay.
prior to the last meeting. Joe connected me with her, and we spoke. And she said that currently is beyond the scope. That was something we would need to do on our own. So all I'm saying is, let's get a ballpark you know, what is something like silt controls? What do you do for silt
I'm
control
more, I
solutions?
think we're better off to find out what the impact is. If she's saying there is an impact,
Well-
I'd rather find out what it is, because if
Now you're
she's saying.
talking about a real expensive engineering study, which I don't think the city's gonna commit to doing at this point. I'm talking about getting a cost estimate. If
To
we-
not even know if it's gonna make a difference. What
so-
if she says putting it in, it won't make a difference? Or the difference that you're gonna make is so little that you're gonna spend, you're the one saying secondary effects. What if we find out that the silting effect is a 100-year event for that pond, that lake? So now we're gonna go and spend $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to do something that wasn't gonna.
All I'm
create-
asking is, can we get an example from them saying, look, we've got, you know the project, you've designed it, you've got these 3 culverts. If we asked you, if it turned out that we needed, later on we found out at the 60%, we need a silt control project, if it determines that, what kind of money are we talking about? You've done this for years.
Catch base.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
they will not do anything without it at zero cost. I mean, that would cost.
Right,
me
no,
10
no,
grand to get that opinion.
he agrees, right, but my issue is, you're kind of going against what you've said all along, that the engineering side of it's not correct with this. I'm saying you're asking to install a structure without knowing what the impact that structure is supposed to be trying to mitigate. Is it something that's big enough to even mitigate in the first place? You say yes because you talked to Globetrotters, but it's like you want to put the end project first before finding out if it's an issue. I agree with you. Let's ask Globetrotters what it would cost to find out what kind of effect the silt's going to have on the lake if we're doing this. You know, what impact it's going to have. Don't just go to the end. I mean, that'd be like me
But here's-
saying, let's just go put 24
Well,
inches of asphalt on all the
What
roads
what
and
I'm
raise it up
determining,
without doing
no,
a
what I'm
study.
determining is worst-case scenario. If they come to us, because they're not gonna give you this answer without spending a lot of money on
But what if
engineering.
the worst-case scenario isn't the actual scenario?
The worst-case scenario, the most expensive solution would be putting in some sort of a silt control project.
What is some,
Let's-
we'll talk offline
If we
about
could
this.
just ask them,
We can ask them what kind of impact this silt will
Because-
have, if any, on the lake. And if there is that, then we can go to that. next time.
I think that answer is gonna be a very expensive answer.
Would you stop Willow Road if they told us is there an answer that would tell you to stop Willow Road?
If they told us that to do a silt control project would cost another $500,000, then I'd ask the council, are you guys willing to spend another $500,000 so that this road project doesn't destroy our lake? If your answer was no, and we were able to determine through engineering that, yeah,
We don't know it's a $500,000 silt project.
that's why I want to ask them.
I want to know if the silt is a problem. I get what you're saying, Tim. We'll talk offline on this, but you're a numbers guy. Let's find out what the issue is before we design. They would have to design to some standard or some situation. How do you know what that is? If, you know.
This is no different than we did with the flashboard riser. We came in,
For $400, I get it,
We,
I get it.
okay,
Heard
we
it.
asked the engineer, hey, if we need to put in a weir, what does it cost? He said $1.5 million. Okay, we got a number, something to talk about. We're not asking him to design it, we're not asking him to evaluate.
Let's find out what, I don't know.
On a
As an
typical,
engineer, you don't design something until you know what standard
on
you're
a
trying to design
typical,
it
on
to.
a typical silt control project of a lake of this size in a typical situation, what kind of ballpark numbers are we talking about? It doesn't seem like an unreasonable
How
question.
about we ask how many silt control projects there are on a project like this first, and then say, what kind of silt are we talking that we might get from it? And then
If
let's
you'd
go
like to
back
make
and
it that
say,
complicated,
if it's
that's
a
fine, but-
$1 million vat of water that we have to filter, is it 100,000 gallons?
Comment here?
Sure, come on up.
I see a disagreement here. And one of the reasons you have an odd number of people on this committee is you can vote to say, should we ask, what is a rough estimate of a dollar amount? Or go with your view, what is the impact and what would be the cost, knowing more engineering? Why don't the 5 of you vote?
We're not voting, we can't, this group cannot obligate the city to do anything. We're just here on
No,
fact
no,
finding.
no. If,
So what we're gonna do is,
I agree with you. I think that there's no harm in asking how much the silt basin would cost. I don't know why you're fighting.
because I don't know what standard, if you told me I had to air condition a building, what if I tell you?
We're not gonna
I
hold
get
them
what
to
you're
it.
saying.
You don't get what I'm saying.
No, no, I 100% I do. I deal with this every day.
I do too.
No, I mean you.
That was good.
So is that something we could do?
But there's no harm in asking what he's asking for. And if they come back and they say, well, it's gonna cost $10,000 to give you my opinion because I'm not gonna put myself in jeopardy throwing a number out there, which they very well may do. Well, then we have to explore that further and talk about it. But to ask them if they are willing to render an opinion,
You
where's the
might
harm?
surprise you. They
Yeah,
might
where's
do,
the harm?
they might do these projects all day long and go, oh, yeah, we just did one about this size, it was 300,000. Boom, done, no cost. Let's try it, shall we?
No problem.
Thank
But I think with that question, we should ask how many silt control projects they do with this.
We don't need the
type of project.
resume, we just need to,
no, you
No,
can get
that's not
into it.
what, that's not what I'm saying. You might be asking for something that happens 1 out of 100 times, because industry-wide, it's not something they do.
I got
right?
that.
You're
And
not
then
allowed-
you're
Well,
gonna, then,
you know,
go ahead, come on
there's-
up, come on up.
There's also a concern too, though, we also have the erosion problem around the lake. So, and there is this, the studies have looked at too.
You're still that
jumping over
flexible.
chairs here.
Can I?
You wanted to
Yeah, go ahead.
All
I
right.
Go ahead,
feel
Joe.
like chopped liver here.
Joe.
Sorry.
Another
I'm gonna
evening.
get out of the way.
The lake's already filling in. The IDNR study from about 1970 or so, we had areas that were 7 or 8 feet, and now they're maybe 2 feet, 3 feet. We've got an erosion problem. So even if there's nothing done with Willow Road, there's a natural eutrophication, which is a different issue, and I kind of don't want that to be blamed on Willow Road.
That's my point about whether or not, if we're looking for a solution in search of a question, you know. and, If it's standard to do silt
Yeah.
control projects, I can't believe they wouldn't have brought that to us. But if it's something that they're saying, yeah, man, I can't believe we're waiting for you to ask us that question.
They're hired by a third party, they can't talk about something beyond the scope of work to a third
They're
party.
still a professional engineer. They've got to render an opinion that works, not just one.
Right, but-
They won't write a report we ask
They're
them
not gonna
write.
bring up a topic with you that their people they're contracted with didn't, it's not within their scope of work.
All right, we talked about.
Because then you're gonna say, well, why didn't they bring this up with you?
Right,
It's not their
no
charter.
problem.
What about dredging the
Can we
lake?
agree?
Is
We
it
talked-
possible
we
to
talked
dredge
about
the
it.
lake if needed?
That's a
already-
whole nother
million and a half.
topic.
I know that's a separate discussion, I'm just asking a dumb question, because I don't
No,
know.
it's extremely costly, that's what.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
What'd you have it at, $1.5 million?
$1.5 million, and it did a nominal effect because the bottom, there wasn't that much soft material at the bottom.
Ken, what's up?
So, I'm not here to talk about silt. Pat, I'm circling back here a little bit, Pat, you
Yeah.
had mentioned before. So, based on how you perceive the engineering plan of what it will do, let's say, okay, so I'm on Hillcrest, I'm probably the lowest person on Hillcrest. So the road, if it's done, is gonna be the highest in front of my property. So, based on what you think you know of how it would play out, if there's an event like we've had, we've been there for 14, 15 years or whatever, and there's 2 that I can recall that within, where I'm walking through yards. Are you thinking that if there's an event, that water is not gonna come across the road into my yard?
I'm thinking you will not get water from the lake, correct?
You're thinking yeah, maybe that doesn't make sense to me, because if the lake is gonna overflow, it's still gonna get to where it got before, which was about 1/3 of the way up my yard. My major concern would be, from a lake standpoint, I don't want the lake coming in my house, and it's never come close to that. If it goes over the road a little bit, honestly, you wanna know what we
Right.
think, I don't care.
Okay.
I'm okay with it, honestly, I'm okay with that. But I don't see how that is gonna make a major difference of keeping the water out of my yard. So let me jump over to another question I haven't heard anybody talk about, and I wasn't here at the very beginning, so hopefully you didn't talk about this yet. But what about the issue of as I can only guess, the massive amount of death and destruction to my yard, my driveway, and all of the trees on that side of the road? It's pretty substantial. I mean, people talked about moving here because of the view. Now, I'm in a house that my uncle bought in 1965. In 1965, he planted 2 Colorado spruce trees. They're there. They're 50, 60 years old. They're phenomenal. They'll be gone. Okay, but there's a lot of other nice trees too. That's all gonna be gone. So the views for people on Hillcrest, substantially different. It's gonna change a lot of the reason why we live there. So, and I've not heard anybody talk about how are they gonna fix this stuff? I mean, it's gonna be substantial damage to my property for a substantial amount of time. What are they gonna do? Nobody's ever told us. I mean, unless I'm missing something, nobody's told us what are they going to do if they do this? Are they gonna do my whole driveway?
Specifically to
Are they
your
gonna
driveway
plant
and to your-
trees? What's that?
Specifically to your driveway and your yard and.
They're gonna,
That's what you're-
so they're gonna, so,
If they do Hillcrest, they're not just gonna raise it, they're gonna have to naturally widen it, right? I mean, I'm not an engineer by any means, but if
Naturally
you're,
widen the road?
yeah, if you're increasing the height, wouldn't you have to make the road wider, just to compensate?
No, I don't, they're not talking about widening the road beyond the 19 feet that it is today, but there would be a full restoration of your property. Okay, so if
I
they're raising
just
the
see
road,
that
you have
the
this
amount of
ditch.
grading to do what would be necessary would be, I can't even imagine.
It is
It's
100%
substantial.
part of the project.
It's gonna be a lot.
You
So,
don't care how much it is, as long as it gets done, correct?
nobody's ever talked about that.
No, but I'm
No,
just
no,
saying.
the engineering people never told us anything about that, so, I'm just asking the question.
Okay.
Based on my experience of living there for as long as I have, and from talking, and I'm pretty involved with taking care of that property. I'm the guy out there with my John Deere cutting from one end of the road to the other to make it look good. That's my yard. The whole block, in a way, that's my yard. I want it to look good, so you help take care of it, but I'm not convinced that this is gonna be a necessary thing, and I'm,
Right,
based on
and
what
I
I
can
know,
appreciate-
I'm not in favor.
I don't want anybody to
personally.
think or go away from this saying, oh, Pat says you've got to raise your road.
Right.
I'll
Well,
give you an
I'm just saying,
example.
you
I'll give
said
you an
you wanted
example.
you want to hear from
I want to hear
people.
somebody, I have to hear you say it,
That's my
because otherwise I
thought.
don't believe it, because it's
Right,
it's
I
so
understand.
foreign to me. It's like sidewalks. I mean, I don't know how you feel about sidewalks, but I would be here doing the same thing you're doing.
Right.
If on Prospect Court, they said they were gonna put a sidewalk
Right.
in. I'd be like, you're insane. You're
No,
gonna
I
knock these
understand.
trees down to put and other people who live on 83 said, we got sidewalks. What's wrong with you? So I just have to, for myself, hear people say, because it is so foreign, that they're okay with not doing this
Understood.
improvement.
And, Tim went to the trouble of, he didn't miss a beat on talking to everyone that needed to opinion on whether they wanted it or not. And Hillcrest, I don't know.
Right, but I have to make
does.
sure, I get that Tim's asking you,
Yeah,
but that's like, Tim has a vested interest in this. He lives there.
Yep.
His opinion is that he doesn't want to change anything with that southeast corner.
right.
I get it, I understand that.
Right.
It is it is the property that abuts his house. I get that. But I've got to hear I got to make sure I hear from other people, because I can't imagine that when he came and asked everybody what they thought
Well,
about this
probably
project,
the
he
three
probably
most-
said, I could see people saying, if I had to put 3 foot of asphalt in the middle of that
Right.
road, what would that look like? Let me stack something 3 foot high there, and then they get this impression in their mind of what's going on. I don't want to lose this opportunity unless people really understand it and say, yeah, no, that's what we thought, and
Well,
we're
probably
okay
the
with not
three
doing
most
it.
effective people I know are not in favor. My next-door neighbor, Don Petty, is not, and Barbara and her husband, Carl, who live right next door to me. We probably have 3 of the best lots on that lake, because our property is right in the middle of our total property. We have pretty much the same amount of front as back. It's awesome. We have a great view. I'm not seeing
Right,
it.
but how do we address the people that live on Owen Court, that don't have the benefit of looking out their window across to the lake? They look out to a cul-de-sac. You do. You're on Owen, you're not, I'm talking about the people on Court
Address is Owen Court.
who can't get through that, because, and do they really have the benefit? I mean, that's what we have
Well,
to
they've
weigh. and it-
experienced the events enough, they've experienced the events enough to say whether or not they think it's a big deal or not.
Right,
If it
but one
was
day it's
something they
not gonna
couldn't
be
live
them,
with, they'd
Ken.
say, oh, gosh, let's get a road and let's
Yeah, but
do
the
it.
aesthetics and the view, when you walk out of your
That's a
house and
fact.
walk a few hundred feet down, and everybody that walks around the lake in the neighborhood, it does matter to the people on Owen Court. Even though they may not face the lake directly and their windows don't or whatever, it does matter. So, you know, big guardrails and drop-offs and all that stuff, not
And
great.
again, you're picturing a
Come on up.
guardrail being a galvanized guardrail.
They can't hear you on the
Even
microphone.
a
man.
nice-looking one, it's blocking some of the view.
I just want to say that you know, if everything, I feel what's going to happen around the lake. I mean, I appreciate Tim so much, and, I mean, all you guys discussing engineering stuff, because I'm not, but I've learned a lot. And I want it done right engineering-wise, too, of course I do, but on the other hand, like, I'm looking at the aesthetics of it, and I'm just thinking of the road, and basically, everything's gonna have to be taken down. If you're messing with a road, and it's not even that great, some of the trees and the buckthorn, and we've got willow trees that are everything's kind of half falling in the lake anyway. They're gonna probably have to take most of that stuff out anyway. And there's a place not too far down Hillcrest where, I'm telling you, there's not very many feet between the road and the erosion. So we have lake, somebody did touch on it, we have lake issues anyway, with a lot of erosion. There's not too many, there's not too much between the lake and the road as it is. So now you start all the digging and all this other stuff around it. And so I'm thinking from aesthetic-wise and why we live in that area is that a lot of that stuff's going to be taken down. Not to mention, like what Ken said, what has to be taken down on our side of the road for this 10-foot, which they said, I got that, 10-foot temporary road across our front yards. And it's true, like, Don next door has beautiful ash trees that he spends hundreds of dollars every year just maintaining them so they don't die, our spruce trees. There's people that are going to be affected by that. And I know you guys, I'm thinking of the end project of it too, what it's going to look like, and then how long this is going to take. And it's disconcerting because I think it's a bigger project than, I think it's going to turn out to be a bigger project than even we think it is. And I think it's going to take longer than 6 to 9 months. I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that at all. I mean, I'm not a betting
Just a
person.
correction, I have not heard 6 or 9 months.
It's 2.
They said 6 to 9.
No,
2
it's
years.
longer than that, absolutely.
Okay.
I think it's 6 to
Well, I
9
heard
months.
6 to
just
9
letting
months to
Willow-
let Willow
Yeah.
Road
Okay.
settle.
Yeah.
6
Willow's
to 9 months.
closed.
Okay, so 2 years for the whole thing.
Right.
Okay.
Do we ever
So
think about
just
snow
imagine-
plowing in there?
Yeah.
So just imagine then, here's the deal. I remember 2 times, once was 2008 and the other one was maybe 2014, where we actually had to walk across the top of your yard to because we literally could not get our car in there. Otherwise, like Ken says, we're in the lowest spot. There's times where we just have to go really slow or we have to park up there and we walk across the top of the yards. And it doesn't go in my basement, so I have to say that this is like a bigger pain, I think, overall than having, some flooding once in a while. And I'm concerned, it's a big deal thinking about my driveway. We're our houses are the closest to the road too, so it's gonna be probably half of my driveway. So I'm gonna have to incur an expense. In addition to what you guys fix, I'll pay for the rest of a driveway. So that it's expensive for us too. And, putting trees in, are they gonna replace trees, everybody's trees? Even around the lake. I think it's gonna look really bare around the lake, because all that stuff's gonna die. It's halfway fallen in the lake anyway.
The expense to you, would possibly be trees. It would not be your
No,
landscaping.
but she's talking about her
grass and stuff.
driveway. If half your driveway is cut up, you let the
You're
other
gonna
half
do the
not
other
go.
half.
I'm gonna have to
I get
spend
that.
money.
I get
Yeah,
that.
I'm gonna have to spend money on that. So that's another thing.
But you brought up a really good point about, there's already problems with the lake and they're not healing themselves.
Right.
the biggest thing I think I bring to the council, my biggest thing, is I watch everything financially. I watch what we're spending money on, how we're planning our future expenses. We will not be able to address anything with that. Let's suppose this project never came along. We would never even be sitting here talking about Willow Road, because there's absolutely, positively no way we could do that. We have 6 Willow Roads throughout the city, you know, and each one is $2 or $3 million to take care of. So I guess I feel like I need to convey that if you're okay with it, you're okay with it for a long, not even just you. The next people to buy your house are okay with it for a long time, because the chances of us dredging that lake are, what would you give the odds? I think I'd rather, I'd get struck by lightning twice before that happened.
There are so many stormwater projects where it's flooding homes that are.
Right, you guys aren't even,
I
you
understand.
guys aren't even a home problem, it's flooding homes.
Right.
Yours is just a street problem.
No,
So
I
we have
totally
both of
understand
those.
that. And I appreciate the whole silt conversation, because I think that's very important. Because it's already only 3 feet deep, that lake, in the, you know, deepest spot.
But the reason
And I'm
why.
afraid it's gonna turn into a swamp in front of my house.
It
I
will,
would
that's the
really-
direction it's going. As it silts in, the stuff is gonna grow, and
Exactly.
we're not gonna stop the duckweed and the cattails and everything else from
Right.
coming. If you look back at pictures of what that looked like before, that lake wasn't always a lake like that. I mean, that's a man-made lake, that was created.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like that was a,
So what you're saying is, well, we've already had this conversation before. I mean, the lake has its own issues. And I just feel like this is gonna make it.
which we don't have the ability to even address.
Well,
But the
yeah,
project
that's
was
true. That's-
addressing part of it, like with erosion control and taking care of other parts of the lake that we could never, they were ancillary things to the project that, when I look at it, I say, look at all that stuff that can be done that we wouldn't ever be able to do. So that's why I got excited about it, but I just, if everybody's okay with it, then I'm okay not doing it too. But it pains me to see that kind of improvement go away forever.
I get it, but I also think that, you know, that I think it's going to increase the ability of that lake to just fill in. And I'm gonna have a swamp. Not only me or somebody that buys it after me.
That won't come because of the project, that would come because of not, you know, addressing the erosion and everything else that would be possibly addressed through this. It's not gonna fix the lake. This project won't
No,
fix the
no,
lake,
it's not gonna
but
fix
it'll
the
take
lake.
care of
I don't
some
think
of
it's
those
gonna
issues.
I'm just going on record as saying that I personally, just my opinion, is not gonna make it any better. And I'm just skeptical about how it's going to be finished at the end. I'm skeptical because of the erosion that's already occurring. So that's all I have to say. But thank you again for everything, but the silt, those are the major concerns. So if you guys can have those addressed for us and answer our questions.
If I could say one piece about that, as far as the erosion, especially if you're raising up Owen Court, that will stabilize that side of the lake as you rebuild that side of the lake. It was also, you know, most of that erosion seems to be taking place in that southeast corner, and it would also address that as you're making that turn.
Well, it's on our side though, too, quite a bit.
Oh, no, I don't disagree with that. I mean, that's where the outlet is.
Could I have the floor for a second?
Sure.
There's not much between the road and, there's not much space between the road and the lake in a lot of spots.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, but Owen is literally right there. That southeast corner has now gotten right to the road as well, and it addresses all those immediate problem areas.
I just want to make a comment, just in response to something that you mentioned about my survey methods. I appreciate the fact that you're willing to stipulate that I do in fact represent the majority of people around the lake by the letters that I provided. But I also need to give you assurances that my training is as a CPA, as an accountant, and we are trained to be independent both in fact and appearance. And I did these surveys and I did these questions totally independent, and everybody in this room that I talked to about this can certify that when I talked to them, I said, look, I'm not affected by Hillcrest. You have to make this call. When I talked to Nick about Owen Court, I said, you have to make the call. I don't want to give you my opinion. And I've been answering questions about driveways and about, You know, we had this whole question where people were submitting me questions. I was getting answers and sending them to them. We've been doing this for 5 months. So rest assured that my survey and my information that I assimilated was done independently. I did not share any biases or any of my own opinions in the collection of this material.
But I just have to tell you, I'm a touch the stove kind of guy. I gotta hear it from everybody that the stove is hot. So it is so, you've never been in this position, that I have never received a call in my almost 20 years here where somebody said, don't do that improvement. You know, let us keep the situation we have. I just have to hear that everybody's okay with that if we move on.
But you need to hear it one at a time, or can you trust that we've gotten?
If we go forward with this, I'll probably walk, even though it's not my ward. I'll
That's
be
fine.
asking the Bankies, I'll be asking everybody who lives over there what they think of this
But we
program.
can't stop,
Because
we
it's
can't stop
so
our
foreign to
progress.
me.
Every time you say, well, let's go out and walk the neighborhood and ask them.
No,
I've done
but
that
Tim,
for
I
5
think,
months.
like you said,
To get on to the
there
real
are portions
issues.
of this project that would change your mind. If you got 1 and 2, but not 3, is it okay?
That's what we'd
Did you
ask.
ever ask it? So you have every combination of those
No,
scenario answers?
absolutely not, because I
Okay.
didn't know that there was combinations available until a couple months ago when I heard it at one of the meetings.
Right, but I guess this is my point, I've got to hear from people.
It's
because
impossible
it's-
mathematically to ask all the combinations.
I agree. And if we did that with every
I
project,
just want to mention something really quick. I live right next to Ken and Sandy on Hillcrest, and like she mentioned, we have a tree in about size of this desk, actually. And I just want to make sure, since we're trying to fix Owen, we're not going to bring any negative issues about when we're going to raise the road, Hillcrest. Are we going to, because the problem with floating, it's just doing through the few months, right, through summer. But we're gonna live there 12 months a year. So I just wanna make sure, like, let's say we're doing right now addition on our house. So sometimes I have to park on a road just because I have so many trucks, and I have 3 small kids. I have a 3-month that I can't really like move my car all the time when they're trying to do something. So let's say I have friends over and they're trying to park the cars. They really won't be able to, right? Because the road is going to be really raised. But not only that, I'm talking about, that's another thing, like they mentioned. I moved here just because we like the area of how it looked. We bought the house in winter. It was December. So it was really different area. We've been there for 5 years, and so far it wasn't that much of an issue for us, with the same like with our neighbors. That's the only thing I want to mention. And I kept the trees. I like the idea of the lake in front of me, of the view that I have from my house. But like I mentioned, I just want to make sure, because we're talking about from engineering perspective, but I would like to also want to make sure it's going to be convenient of the road to be so high for me not to have like no problems or anything like that, what I'm going to face. So that's what I just want to mention.
I don't think the end result would change your use of your property, I think is what do you think that's gonna impact how you would use your property? When it's done?
Are you talking short-term
No,
during the
she's talking when
construction?
it's done and friends.
We're talking
the
about,
roads.
I'm talking about in general, of leveling and having the road higher, is like, if I would want to sell this house.
It would actually make your home more like most of the other homes in Prospect Heights.
Well,
I don't know exactly how deep a swale would be.
We're gonna have to take the trees down, right? Because I have a huge tree in front of my house, which I love
Yeah,
because.
there's no denying that this is gonna change things with trees and with guardrails and what, there's no denying that. You can't make that kind of change and not have an impact.
Well,
It's just
before you
impossible.
say that, we would have to see your property and see your tree, and the engineer would have to tell us, yeah, that tree would have to be removed or not. I don't know how far or close to the road it is.
What's in about where Ken's spruce are?
I don't know where Ken's. is.
So, I understand, but it's just, I just want to make sure it's going to be worth it to do it. And it's going to, because on Owen Street, it's only a few houses. We're talking about the whole Hillcrest, that it's going to affect the whole Hillcrest, which is more houses on the Hillcrest.
All right, so is that everybody that wants to speak? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Is it possible to put up the overall map?
Certainly.
And I just want to explain one point, I won't take long.
Oops. There we go.
Okay, so the corner there, which is Hillcrest and Owen Street at the intersection there.
Just above where it says overland flow path.
Yeah, to the, yeah, towards me and up from there, yeah. That intersection there, generally, that does not ever flood. Maybe in 20 years, I've been here 23 years, and the flood comes to that actual intersection, I would say twice in 23 years. And we've had probably 2 or 3 dozen floods over Owen Street. So there is a huge sag on Owen Street. If you were just to raise Owen Street to the level at the intersection, then it would not flood. It really would not flood, and as you can see, we raise it to the level of the intersection. So that means that Hillcrest, there's no necessary compensation on the levels to merge into Hillcrest. It's already at that level.
Keep in mind that air, water, anything, it takes the path of least resistance, okay?
Yeah.
So yes, while you're raising the road at Owens, and you're only taking it up to where that intersection is, it's gonna find somewhere else to go over if we don't raise the rest of it. So the SIOCs, saying they're the low point, might be the beneficiary of quite a bit more water. It's gonna find its way somewhere.
It's just the width of the road times the height. That's all that, the water you're talking about. The difference that it raises times the width. It's very little. It's very little water displacement.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying that it's going to seek its way out of the
Right,
lake somewhere.
and I know sometimes things are oversimplified and say, just raise this, and it's, we necessarily can't just do that.
There's no railing at the intersection
I get,
right now.
I get
There's no railing
it.
there, and we'd only bring it to that height. So there's no big deal about no railing.
Right here is that culvert that goes under the road right now. So if this was just to come up a little bit, like Richard's talking about, to meet this elevation at the intersection, it's still gonna come up the culvert and go this way and fill in. And it's still gonna probably go over the road somewhat, if it's only about 12 inches up from where it is, but we're gonna be able to drive over it. It's the only, and it'd be, you're talking how much?
Nick, as I understand it, the intent is for those culverts, in converse of what Tim is saying, they're to be pitched so that it alleviates the water that's backing up into your yard and directs it more towards a compensatory storage area.
Where would it go? You're still gonna go into this floodplain.
Yeah, but if the outflow elevation of that is higher than what it is now, I mean, because the lake, so if that outflows, if it's pitching this way, I get it, it comes into your yard. If it's pitching the other way, like Scott's saying that he believes it is, now you've got to have that water raise all the way up to a higher level to come into your.
If you're going up 3 feet, you have more elevation in which to pitch it. Okay, if you reduce that, then you have less elevation, which will ultimately back more up into your space.
Could I,
Or the overland flow.
I have the floor for a second?
Sure.
Could I say something in response? The reason I know it's not pitched is because he would go above the top of the
We're
road.
gonna get that,
Right.
I don't wanna litigate.
But there's not
whether or
enough
it's
room
pitched.
in the road to pitch it any higher than it already is. It's at a minimum level underneath the road right
Okay.
now.
We got it. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 comments, 2 different things. In the interest of transparency, I'm from Ward 2. We're nowhere near this thing, but I've been interested in it for a number of years. I think I've sat in this room in one capacity or another for about 20 years, looking at sitting here and then sitting up at the dais. What I think you want to do, and I think Pat has articulated it, rather than designing it right here. Get the pros in that you talked about, create the agenda, perhaps have your questions defined for them ahead of time going into the meeting, and let them respond to you as to what it is. To me, that seems to be your next meeting.
Right.
I would think.
And I think that rather than having a meeting and having people come here, if they've all signed over to Tim.
Right.
We can just meet with MWRD and talk about all these goofy invert elevations and whatnot, and come up with a solution, because obviously Tim could speak for them, and we can get that answer.
No, I don't think you should exclude the rest of
It's always going to be a public meeting.
The results of what, no, there could be we could have an independent meeting with the engineer. I mean,
A business
we meet
owners
with,
meeting.
right, not
While they're
a,
working.
As a group, more than three, can we do that? Is it
as long as there's not more than three of us. This is not a,
an
is
Open
this
Meetings
a
Act
Open Meetings Act meeting?
Yeah, or
You can't have
two,
more.
you can only have two.
I'll defer to Scott, he can go to the meeting with you.
Okay.
So we can hash out a lot of these little details, because to drag Cedric here and crucify him about whether it's pitched 3 degrees or 9 degrees, he's not gonna have that answer.
Why?
So instead of doing that, maybe if we meet with him and he can take the information, if what we give him as far as questions isn't enough, we can meet in person.
Right,
and
if
do
you,
that.
that's why I suggested that you pre-prepare the questions for him,
Right,
for
that
whoever,
question to whatever
and
answers
get
come
the
back,
input
we're gonna
from
have
the
more
questions
too, so at some
from
point
the
we'll
larger
meet.
group, and that becomes your vehicle, and you can have that discussion and have that report coming back. The second thing I'd like to talk about is, as I said, I've been sitting in this room, I think, about 20 years in one capacity or another. And this meeting is probably very significant, not just for Hillcrest Lake and the Willow Road project. To me, there's a significance here that you may or may not realize, but you've initiated a culture shift in how the city does its business. It's the first time I can remember a meeting whereby you've had this in detailed interaction with the elected officials, with staff, and with the community directly involved in the issue. I recall how these other sessions went where we did have that. When I sat on the dais, and before that, where we asked for community input and things like that, it reminded me of the heads on Easter Island. As they sat there, we sat there as talking, bobbing heads and listened, and there was no dialogue. There was a tremendous amount of dialogue here. I mean, you got, to me, personally, you got a little bit in the weeds, but that's okay. But the point, huh?
We got into the duckweed.
I didn't hear what you said.
We got into the duckweed.
Duckweed, all right. But to me, this is the way things should happen in a community like this, to have this dialogue and this interaction and the transparency of what's going on, so everybody understands. So I congratulate you on that. Thank you for initiating this, and I hope we continue to do things like this and other issues, because there'll be other issues that we need to talk about as well. That's all I had.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you.
So I guess the takeaway is, Joe can formulate the questions as he heard them tonight, maybe circulate them to us and give us a deadline to reply as to whether or not that's how we see the questions. And then we can get that to Cedric, wait for his response, and then decide from there how we move forward. But there is a timeliness to this. This is not something that can go on till July. I mean, this is probably less than 60 days to get this, at least a direction of which way we're going to go or what we're going to do down. So hopefully we can get Cedric to get back to us pretty quick.
And Globetrotters, I think Globetrotters probably would be a good resource to ask them these questions of.
Yeah,
It would be both.
I think maybe we have a city
Design
engineer.
so.
He works for GeWalt, I mean, he works for us 20 hours a week. Maybe we can ask him, if we're gonna go to Globetrotters, how to formulate whatever questions we're asking, so we're not gonna go back and forth. with it.
Right, well, there's, as I understood, we ended up with, there's kind of two areas of the scope. One is particularly related to the MWD project, which would be both Cedric is the project manager, and Griselda is the Globetrotters consulting engineer. And then the other one is the question about the catch basin.
Correct.
So,
Right.
and Steve, we can deal with that with
Right.
Steve, absolutely.
Right.
Okay.
Anything we're asking of Globetrotters, I do think that we should deal with the project manager being Cedric, and then let that funnel through Cedric to Globetrotters. And then we can have direct conversations with Globetrotters. Once Cedric has said, yeah, go ahead and do it. I just
It
don't want
just
to
seems that
circumvent him from the
Cedric's-
process.
Right.
The Globetrotters' availability seems to be better than Cedric. Cedric,
It's okay, but Cedric is the project
I understand
manager,
that.
and we don't want to
Right.
upturn the apple cart.
because he has to go
It's
back
just
to.
disrespectful.
Right, oh, no, yeah, absolutely.
And that's all I'm asking, is that we respect the process.
I agree. It should only go through Cedric, and if, you know, if we get any trouble with that, then we can figure out what to do, but you don't want to go end around the project manager.
No.
Well, it's their project, so we have to.
Ultimately, the answers will come from her,
Yeah,
because she's the
and,
designer.
you know,
It's happened to me
if
and it
possible,
didn't-
maybe we can ask if we can submit the questions
Sure.
directly to Globetrotters, but with the permission of Cedric. I don't think, by the time you go through 3 people, it gets a little,
Knowing
but getting the-
Cedric will say, yeah, go ahead and do it.
Right.
He still deserves the respect
Sure.
of
and we should
being
ask
your
him.
first point of
No question about it.
And the points of contact will be, from this committee, will be Joe. I don't want us going rogue and everybody running to Globetrotters and Cedric, and so he has no point of contact. Joe should be the only communication between the city and this committee and Globetrotters and MWRD. Everybody agree to that? Yes? No?
Unless he invites us to speak to him.
Right, if we
directly.
go to a meeting
Yeah.
separately, but
I mean,
I don't want to start plying him to say,
Just so
hey,
you
can we
know-
start calling you directly?
Just so you know, both of them have indicated to me that I could call them directly, but in the 5 months since the last meeting, I haven't called them.
Unfortunately for you, you now are on an official
Right,
committee.
I get
so
that.
You are not John Q. Public that
I
can
get
call
that.
anybody they
I get
want.
that.
So Joe will be the
Sure.
point of contact.
Right, and
for
I
that.
don't intend to change my habit
Okay.
so far. I mean, I've gotten all the
All right.
information I need.
So with, I don't think, these aren't going to be planned meeting dates. I think we'll have to figure out what happens once we,
I thought we are going to set one.
no, because I don't want to set it for a month if we get answers back in 2 weeks. I'd rather be able to be
Okay.
quicker than later.
Sure.
Believe me, I've said, I think this is a 60-day thing. I mean, we've
Okay.
got to get
Well,
this
I'm
resolved in
all in
60
favor of it.
days. So I'm not trying to extend it out. I'm not trying
Okay.
to, in case you're thinking I'm trying to do this with the letter coming to us with the intergovernmental agreement and play out the clock. I agree with you. We have to resolve this as a
Okay.
committee before that IGA is
Agreed.
finalized. So with that,
We need 48 hours notice, basically, for
That's it.
publishing. Okay.
so with that, any other,
One
go
more
ahead.
question,
Yeah.
just based on what you think you know at this point. If there was gonna be the road project, what would be your estimation for when it would actually start?
I think next year. I don't think anything starts.
I know, I've heard next year.
You know what, I think that date originally was, spring 2020, and I think that we're behind we're behind schedule now. My guess is you'd probably run into 2021 at this point.
Like to begin,
What's that?
to begin?
Would you say?
Yeah, I would say that.
Because, I mean,
So what you're thinking is, and that's, I appreciate that answer. What you're saying is likely, based on what's happened so far, 2020 would be
the
optimistic.
original projection, when we last spoke about this, when they had their presentation, being MWRD and Globetrotters, the projection was spring of 2020. Again, we were talking earlier about the IGA being anticipated to be received, October, November. Well, now we're 4 or 5 months past that. So that project, there's no way it could start.
But if it was to change, if the
Not
scope was to
2020.
change, and it turns out in the next 60 days, it's just Willow Road, that's a lot smaller of an entire project. So the engineering wise, it would speed up the
Get
process.
it, you still have the IGA, and the IGA that they've told us, we haven't heard a word about it in the last.
And well, at present, this project has not been formally approved by
Correct.
the MWRD board.
Correct.
So there's no reason to think that it's not going to happen, but MWRD has a lot of priorities, and this is one of
Any
them.
given day, anything
Right.
can happen.
Right.
And maybe that's one of the questions that Joe could have.
Hopefully, people don't put calendar dates in their mind.
Yeah, but the reality is,
Pure speculation.
the original date of spring 2020,
And what you said.
We're a year away from that, and we're not even close to being.
Call hearing, but I'm just using common sense based on how it has gone up to this point, that it's not on original schedule.
No, there's no way it's on original schedule.
And in the discussions that Joe has with Cedric, maybe that could be part of the conversation.
Mhm.
You know, how is our timeline looking? Are we still looking at originally 2019 for getting this contracted out, 2020 breaking ground? Are we still, how far out? Maybe he'll give us some sort of an idea.
It's a good question to ask.
Let's ask that after we get our first three.
Tough one.
Right, right.
Even if you don't know,
Come up to the,
even if you don't know when you're gonna get all the answers, I mean, it seems to me that to keep this on track, there should be some period of time, let's say even 30 days, where we can at least have an assessment as to where we are, and it can be reported, because otherwise, there's no information that these people are getting. So I think if we could just keep this on track, set a time, I mean, 30 days, is that reasonable?
I think it's too long.
It's already too long? Then 2 weeks,
I don't want
then
to say 2
14
weeks and we
days.
don't get it. Let's get this, in the next week, we're going to have more information from Cedric and whether he can get us this answer quickly, and we'll have the meeting sooner. If we can get Cedric to answer this by Friday, I'd call for the meeting Tuesday. So, I mean,
Okay.
I'm ready to go. There's
Okay.
no delay on the city's part here of this. My fear is if we set a date, we're going to set it too far out. If we set it too soon, people are going to be blocking days out that then don't happen, and they're going to say, what are you doing? Why is this happening? Let's just, we have meetings at the city every 2 weeks. We can keep everybody up to speed. It'll be on the e-news.
So this can be
it'll
maybe on the agenda for the next city council meeting? For
This?
a report?
Sure,
for a
yeah,
report,
we can
for a
report on this
report.
at the next council.
Report, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Even if it's not on the agenda, I'll do it as part of my, my report, so. There's no reason.
Well, as the council is aware too, periodically, my internal reports have been,
Yeah.
there's no change. The contacted MWRD, they've moved the date back from November to December to January or so forth. So sometimes the report is that there's nothing new.
Can we,
Yeah.
But it doesn't hurt to report.
Right.
Even if that's a report.
Right.
Okay.
can we agree that at minimum, we will have another meeting in 30 days if we don't have one sooner, but the goal is to meet sooner?
Yes, but if we don't have an answer from Cedric, what would we meet about?
What it does is gives people other opportunities to come in.
I'm gonna say my phone number out loud because I couldn't believe you didn't have it until today. You're a resourceful guy, so I couldn't believe that. My phone number is 708-932-5348. Call me. It'll ring all the time. It's my cell phone.
Say it one more
So if you
time.
got questions, 708-932-5348.
Who's
So if-
giving them my number?
All right, so with no other business, I look for a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
All in favor? Can I do that?
Aye.
Aye.
That's all right. We're informal.